action. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Bill Whittle. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge that's produced in the lounge up here in the Stratosphere. Now you know how the trick works. The worst produced show on the internet is now reaching episode number 91. So prepare for the seismic shock waves to occur when we get to 100. But in any event, it's good to have everybody here. It's 6 o'clock on a Wednesday as usual. And I have a small little apology to make about the Stratosphere Lounge. You know, I've got a bunch of these things right here on the disk drive that I need to get uploaded, and I owe you all a big apology because I've been meaning to do that, but I've been just so darn busy, been traveling a lot and editing a lot and all the rest of that. So before I leave tonight, I'll upload those suckers the way I always promised I would, and we'll get that archive back up to shape. But it's great to be here, and it's great to be back in the lounge. I haven't spent much time in the office the last couple weeks, been on the road a lot, and just generally running around. We do have, however, some interesting news. We did finally get these speakeasy shows cracked open. So I've edited the first one. I'm going to try and get the second one done. Speaking of travel, I'm going to be on the road even more. I'm going to be gone pretty much all next week. So I don't think we'll have a TSL next week, but we will have probably 4 or 5 in the archive that we can get uploaded and going. So that'll be good news, hopefully. And, yeah, let me just tell you a little bit about the speakeasy thing now that we've actually had a chance to really get it open here. You know, we knew when we were going to do it before we get going today. We knew when we were going to do the show that we were going to learn a lot from the show by doing it, that was one of the goals, really, was to figure out how we wanted to do the show. So some things we learned a lot of things, and some things we're going to keep and some things we're going to change. But one thing we did learn was that the location, the location was great. The audience was great. Having people come and visit was really fun. We're gonna keep it a little bit tighter. I'm actually thinking what I might do when we do the next one is I might actually create a prop bar. Just tell me if you like this idea, because it came up with it today. I kind of like it a lot. Hi, everybody. Everybody saying hi in the comment section. So what we thought we might do for the next one is do like a prop bar, but from the bartender's point of view. And then behind would be like maybe a flat with a door and an open sign in the window. And we'd get an actor to play a bartender. And then we would basically have 3 bar stools facing the audience and the camera. And then we'd start each show by having the bartender walk up to the sign, lock the door, turn the open sign off so it looked like it was closed, and have a picture of Barack Obama hanging there on a wire. And as soon as he closed the windows and turned off the open sign, he'd revert it, and on the other side in the same frame would be Ronald Reagan. And he'd go back behind the bar, and there'd be like a secret knock, and maybe you'd see like surveillance footage and be somebody out there on the street. And he'd buzz the door open, and maybe I'd come in and answer one question from the bartender, and then the next guest would come in, and the 2 of us would answer a question. And then the third guest would come in, and I think 3 will probably do it. So the way it would look would be, it would look like 3 people sitting at a bar talking to the bartender. And the bartender would be a professional actor, but he would have the questions from the audience, and I just think that'd be pretty cool. So there we go. A couple of people asking about the missing episodes, and they are mostly sitting on my desktop, but we're going to get them uploaded tonight if you missed the opening. So there you go. Anyway, that's the latest in terms of the content news. I have here something kind of cool, just as a quick opening, because we'd like to do a couple minutes before we go right to the questions. Boom. This is the package, and it's from Sporty's Pilot Shop. I just realized maybe it's not best to put up my mailing address out there like that. In any event, the Sporty's Pilot Shop has sent me something really, really cool. And what they've sent me is something called, well, they didn't send it free. What I bought from them was something called the Stratus. I gotta like the name of that. And basically what it is, it's an enhanced GPS receiver that produces it's got its own Wi-Fi. It produces, I guess it uses Wi-Fi, not Bluetooth. Might be Bluetooth, I'm not sure. In any event, this device is an enhanced GPS receiver, and it is also receiving weather information and traffic information, And because it's using WAS, which is the Wide Area Augmentation Service, I want to think, it's extremely precise GPS, which means that since it's so precise, it'll let you do, it's got its own internal AHARs, attitude, solid state attitude indicators. So it gives you an artificial glass cockpit kind of thing here, and tells you your airspeed on strips on one side and your altitude on the strip on the other, turn and bank information in the center. So you got a complete glass cockpit, and it does something called synthetic vision, which means that as you're flying through a canyon, let's say, you would look down on your iPad and the GPS knows where it is relative to this terrain database, including in 3 dimensions. And as you fly through this canyon, let's say, even with the windows painted black, it just looked like a video game. You'd see the sides of the canyon. Everything that's above your altitude is coded red. Everything that's less than 500 feet is yellow, and everything more than 500 feet is green. So, you know, it's just a wicked cool little thing. And the nice thing about it, too, is since it's putting out a signal, that means that my iPad can use it. The person in the back seat has an iPad that can use it. And so there's a little flying toy that I can't wait to play with because I haven't been in the airplane very much. We are going to do a Stratosphere Lounge in the airplane. I got a couple of HD Hero cameras. I might use those. I might go ahead and get a couple of 4K cameras. And by the way, we talked a little bit about that drone, the Inspired drone, which is really incredible. That I really didn't have any desire to sink money into something that I couldn't justify professionally. But that new Inspired drone has a 4K resolution, which is film resolution. So that'd be pretty cool. Dwight Schultz as a bartender is a darn good idea, Craig, in the comment section there. I was actually hoping to keep Dwight as a guest, really. So we'll find somebody. I'm sure we can dig up a couple of actors who never want to work again. And there we go. So so I'd like to get that flying show out here in the not-too-distant future. And it's nice to have that device there because it'd just be fun to look at. Also, the idea of putting the two together would be kind of fun. You want to be really careful with this, obviously. We've talked about drones and collisions and stuff. But if I went someplace, out of some remote area, some uncontrolled area, it was plenty safe, there's nobody on the ground, I suppose what I probably could do is have somebody on the ground fly the drone up to, 1,000 feet, or if we're further out, 600-700 feet. And then I could kind of circle the area until I'd visually acquired the drone. I'm assuming I'm flying the Sky Arrow. And then once I had the drone in sight, I'd be able to fly past it as close as I thought was safe, which could be pretty close. Give yourself plenty of room for a gust or something. But then you'd have basically aerial footages of the plane coming by the camera and peeling off. That'd be kind of cool, too. So hopefully we'll get some flying footage in there, and I'd like to use that drone for the movies, and it's probably good incentive for me to go down and do some location scouting for Big Bat Problems, which is going to be set, the climax of which is going to be set in really horrible place, actually, called Bombay Beach, which is on the Salton Sea, and I feel so sorry for the people who live there, but that's a whole other story. We'll talk about that some other time, because it's there's a documentary on Bombay Beach and a movie, like a low budget feature film made there, and the Salton Sea is just the saddest. It's just the saddest place in America, I think, and for reasons that, like I say, I'll probably explain later. So hopefully we'll get a chance to do a Big Bat Problem pre-show show in the near future. So anyway, why don't we get to the questions, because I want to keep it relatively brief tonight. I need to get back to getting this first speakeasy up online, because I'm going to be gone next week. So I'd like to get one up this weekend and one the following weekend, and then we'll be happy campers. Yeah, Clint Eastwood is bartender. Karsten Mueller just recommended. I do have his contact info. I don't know. He may be busy, and it's probably more role than he can handle, It's a couple hours, hour and a half. I'd hate to give him something he could, wouldn't be able to get his chops from. So we'll take it from there. All right, here we go. First question for the night comes from Trey Lyles, who asked, Bill, have you ever visited any liberal websites such as Americans Against the Tea Party or Being Liberal just to see what anti-conservative articles they post? If so, what was the one that caught your attention the most? Trey, I try not to do that because it actually genuinely drives me out of my mind. It just makes me more angry than I need to get. However, I did see something that I walked back to Being Liberal Facebook page, and it was a picture I think I used it in one of the firewalls. I can't remember which one right now. It was a picture of a woman holding up a sign that said, you know, when all the earth is dead, when all the rivers are poisoned, when all the air is unbreathable, blah blah blah, then finally you'll learn that people can't eat money. And I just basically did a whole run on that whole idea because it was so remarkably stupid. That's all you need to know about these people, right? These are childish thoughts. I remember one of the lines in there is, I already know that you can't eat money, but you can eat, but money can be traded for food. So there's something to be said for money. In any event, I don't like to go to those things mostly because my blood pressure gets a little too high. I don't generally deal with those things very well. I can talk to people. If I'm in a debate with somebody, that's a different story. But just sitting there reading them drives me a little nuts. And on that note, I should tell you that the Academy Awards, I hadn't watched the Academy Awards in probably 8 years. Maybe longer. I don't think I watched it since the Iraq War started because of the politics. And I decided, I had a friend ask me to watch it, and I watched it, and I just, you know, I nearly lost my mind. I did an afterburner about it today with hair that looks like I slept in a cardboard box in. But in any event, it was pretty disgraceful. You know, you listen to these people. The thrust of the afterburner I shot today is along these lines of the same kind of things that you would get in liberal websites like Being Liberal. And that's basically the idea. The afterburner was called Life in Hell. And the basic idea is that, you know, this is a living hell where women get paid less than men even though they don't do as many jobs, as dangerous a job, or they don't do jobs for as many hours. They still screaming about getting paid less than men when they put in fewer hours and do safer work. You know, this whole business at the Academy Awards with the soundtrack from Selma, you know, Singing Glory, and these black multimillionaire singers telling us about how the struggle continues and how, gee, it's so awful here in America, and one day, you know, we'll have a country where black people can succeed, and, you know, maybe someday we'll see black people in entertainment, and who knows, we might even see a black person on television, or even, who knows, you might even see a black Secretary of State someday, or maybe even a black president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, you know, so we can always dream, right? It drove me crazy, and then, you know, the guy who played Martin Luther King standing up with tears in his eyes, I could handle that. But Chris Pine watching this travesty where they're invoking Michael Brown and you know, Ferguson, and it's like, you know, guys, the guy was 6'3" or something. I've seen video of him beating a black man nearly to death, some poor old junkie. I saw him push people around, push that store owner around. And these black multimillionaires are on the Academy Awards show trying to convince everybody that this country you just can't get ahead if you're a black man in America. Just ask the President of the United States, he'll tell you. So there's that nonsense. And then there was more from the guy who won Best Picture for Birdman. It was a great movie, an amazing movie. Wishing we could afford, you know, Mexicans the same dignity that had been afforded to previous generations. And my response to that was, I'd love to afford them the same dignity as previous generations if they would be willing to come in and to the country legally like previous generations, and, you know, and study for citizenship like previous generations, and pass a citizenship test like previous generations, and learn how to speak English like previous generations, and swear allegiance to this country and no other like previous generations, then they'd be more than entitled to the respect and dignity that previous generations got. But since they don't, they don't. So anyway, I was watching these Academy Awards and my head was about to explode. I mean, it was a really bad scene, bad. So, you know, I don't know. I was pleased to find out that the audience was low. As pleased. Oh, and Patricia Arquette. Yeah, I think I mentioned that earlier. This business about how women are, you know, so underpaid. The most underpaid people, biggest income inequality in America is on a movie set, where somebody like Patricia Arquette might make $1 million for 3-4 weeks' work, and the actor standing 3 feet behind her as an extra be lucky to make $100 for an 18-hour day. So, yeah. But the point is, these liberal sites drive me crazy because that's basically what they're selling, right? They're selling America as this racist, misogynist, homophobic, xenophobic land of horror. And thank God we have progressives here to change all these things, to fundamentally change that which they love so very, very much. I can't take it, man. it's more than I can handle. So I don't really go there, Trey, unless I really need to, and I don't need to, so I don't. Moving on, Gary K says, hey, Bill, I study animation at an art academy in Israel and also in a university which are swarming with leftists. First of all, welcome, Gary. Secondly, hello to everybody out in Israel and ships at sea and all the ships at sea. And furthermore, it's got to be heartbreaking to be surrounded by leftists in Israel, because here in America, being surrounded by leftists is very, 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 very annoying. But I would imagine in Israel it'd be all of that plus fatal too. I mean, it must be an existential kind of annoying. Anyway, back to the question, where do you draw the line between just ignoring delicate flowers that think leftist thoughts and blame their own country, my country in this case, on the fact Arabs want to kill us and we're to blame for everything, and answering them? Seems that when I try to explain to them how it really is, they don't want to hear my side of the story or don't really care. That sounds fairly familiar from the leftist point of view. He goes on to say, P.S. Warm regard from Israel. Warm regards to Israel on behalf of me and so many other Americans. Honestly, you have no idea how many friends you have here. I love TSL a lot. I'll watch it recorded. He said also he added his wrench. He's a graphic designer. Take a look at this, folks. It's pretty bloody spectacular, I think. I got to tell you, I like that. I think I like that better than I like mine. In fact, I know I do. That is a remarkable logo, and Gary, we should have a talk. I love it. 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 I think it's really tremendous work. Anyway, so back to the question. Where do you draw the line between ignoring people and blaming them? I'm kind of coming to the place, Gary, where I'm not letting them get away with anything anymore. Anytime somebody tells me that they're a socialist, the first thing I do is ask them to explain the 100 to 200 million people who've been killed in the name of socialism. They're not really liking that very much. I've noticed when I do that. I notice that when you point out all the millions of people that have died as a result of socialism, they get a little, I don't know, uncomfortable almost. And I don't blame them. That's a lot of dead people. I'm gonna have a little sip of apple cider in my BillWhittle.com cup, which you can obtain for yourself. Become a member at BillWhittle.com, and in order to do that, I believe we'll go to the wide shot. That's good cider. That's a pretty cool cup. Anyway. I think the answer is we got to stop letting these people off the hook. The only reason socialists and liberals really are still here as a political movement is because they get to forget their errors. They're so profoundly good at it, and helps having the media, because if there was a media, there wouldn't be a left. Not as a viable political force in this country. That's why they have to run everything, and that's why they have to exclude contrary voices as much as possible. They couldn't survive an honest retelling of their actual history. The way that we won the war in Vietnam. I know I've been saying this quite a lot lately because I think it's true. If you wanted to look, it certainly was not how I would have fought it, and God knows we spent a lot more lives over there than we needed to in 11 years. But if you wanted to find the Vietnam War as at the end of the shooting war, were the borders the same as they were prior to the communist socialist invasion? And the answer is yes, they are the same borders. They were anyway. So when the ceasefire occurred and everybody signed the peace treaty, then that looked like a win to me, because the communists were back above the northern Vietnam border, where the communists tend to come from when they launch their invasions that create all these wars, when the socialists launch these wars and invasions that end up getting blamed on America. So the way that the Democrats and the socialists and the liberals sold out the Vietnam War is shameful and treasonous. The way they sold out the Iraq win is treasonous. The way they're selling out Israel is treasonous. The way they're sold out the Poles, who took an enormous risk at putting up that missile defense shield, to the Russians is treasonous. The way they sold out the Ukraine is treasonous. My friend Jeremy Boring points out that Ukraine at one time had, when the Soviet Union disintegrated, my understanding was that the Ukraine had, I think, the second largest collection of nuclear warheads in the world, being their share of the Soviet Union. The Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic had a lot of nuclear weapons. And Bill Clinton and the Americans, us, but the Democrats, convinced Ukraine to basically destroy or turn over those warheads in exchange for an ironclad, and I mean an ironclad, all-time ironclad guarantee of protection from the United States of America, which the Ukrainians did. Poor judgment on their part, I'm sad and embarrassed and ashamed to say. And then next thing you know, there are Russian tanks in the Ukraine, and the big guarantee that we provided to protect them has been put in the hands of President Hope and Change. And so, tough for you, Ukraine. So, yeah, it's time to hold these people accountable is all I'm saying. It's time to hold them accountable. And I don't have to lie about what I believe. I don't have to lie about any of this stuff. I just say what happened to them. So I don't think we can let them go, Gary. I think you got to hold them to it. I think you got to hold them to it on little things as well as big things. One of the, I don't know if I used this last time, I like it an awful lot. They're so easy to defeat, and not only to defeat, if you can do it with a little bit of humor, you can actually flip them. For example, this is just a recent argument I've been trotting out a lot because I really love it. I was in a discussion with some guy, and he was saying, "Oh, this capitalism thing, you make some interesting points, but you got to admit that at one point when somebody you can have too much money." Right? I mean, somebody who has 5 houses, geez, there's no way you can justify having, more than one house. You can't live in more than one house at a time. There are homeless people in this country. How on earth can you justify somebody having 3 or 4 or 5 houses? My response to that was, as long as that person earned that money and it's their money, then they can have as many houses as they want to, right? That's their business. Well, it just is evil and awful and wrong and vile. You say to this person, check your iPhone and tell me how many songs you have. The guy had 750 songs on his iPhone. And my response was, do you need 750 songs? Couldn't you get by with 50 and take that $700 of music that you downloaded, buck a pop, and given that to poor people? Do you listen to all 750 songs at the same time? Do you listen to them in the same day? Do you not care about the poor, that you would spend so much money on more and more songs that you could never listen to, really? Certainly you don't need 750 songs. Why didn't you just give that $700 to poor people like you claim you should? And then they realize, oh, okay, you bought as many songs as you could afford, you bought as many songs as you wanted, and that's what life is about. If you're a top-level predator with consciousness, you should be able to do what you want to and live the life you want to live within your means. And if you want bigger things or better things or more things, or if you want to help more people, it's fine with me. It's obviously fine with me. Then you have to work harder, and you have to develop skills and additional skills and keep getting educated, all that stuff. When you turn it into something personal, like how many songs do you have on your iPhone? Don't you have more than you need? How many songs do you need? Didn't you get by with 10 songs? I mean, do you really need 750 songs? What you do in a case like that, Gary, is you confront these leftists with their own their own philosophy. You spin it around on them and give them something that they can get their hands on. Because, as I've said many times, these leftists are all in favor of wealth redistribution as long as there's somebody else's wealth being redistributed to them. When they have to distribute their wealth to other people, not so much. And the same thing goes true for being a hawk, right? I mean, it's easy to say, oh man, I'm all about peace when you live in a world that's protected by warriors. People who aren't protected by warriors, who are mortared and shot at and sniped every day, or people who live in such appalling economic conditions because people can just take what they want at the point of a gun, or because they have connections whose brothers, in the ministry of, soap or whatever in your socialist paradise, then all of a sudden, peace doesn't look so good. So, they hate prosperity because they have prosperity. They hate peace. I mean, they hate war because war protects them. And if you took away these things, they'd be facing reality, and that's when they get off the boat. So good luck with them, Gary. But to answer your question, I would say no. I wouldn't give them any room. I just go right at them. Go right at them. And again, for you and for all the rest of you in Israel, I know you may seem like you're alone out there, and I know that it's got to be awfully lonely out there without the sense of the United States being behind you. But you should also know that while these progressive, terrorist sympathizing traitors that are running the country right now are in fact running the country right now, The fact of the matter is you have hundreds of millions of friends here, and we're heavily armed, and we also pay taxes, and I think in another couple years you'll probably have somebody who's a better friend. And in a couple years you're going to have somebody who's a better friend. You're not going to run into anybody worse than Barack Obama, at least not in my lifetime. I can't imagine such a thing. Moving on, it's the Zachariah Tiemann Show, and it's the fourth time asking, so, hey, okay, well, you got the uptick, so here we go. And this one's a bit of a proposition. He says, on the conservative side, we hear a lot about the 17th Amendment and how it neutered the Senate. I've done quite a bit on that. But almost nothing about how the number of seats in the House was frozen in 1929 when our population was roughly a third of what it is today. The Constitution dictates that the smallest number of people required to add a House seat is 35,000. If every state had one representative per 35,000 people, the House would have 8,800 seats. With all of this in mind, is it not safe to say that the House is not functioning as intended? And what would be a better number of representatives than 435? Wow. That's a really great, profound question. Since I never really thought about this before, I'll give it to you kind of as it comes to me, Zechariah, hence the fun of this show, right? I think my response would be that what we're really talking about is a fineness of mesh. It's like a sensitivity issue. Just off the top of my head, I saw a really compelling argument. You'll see where I'm going with this, hopefully. Very compelling argument that said that Celsius is a great scale if you work in a laboratory, but the Fahrenheit scale is a much better scale for human beings. After all this lecturing from all these people about the metric system, this person's argument was that the Fahrenheit scale for everyday life for human beings is far superior to the Celsius scale. And he went into a lot of detail about it, but basically what he was saying was this. I love this argument. He said on the Fahrenheit scale, 0 degrees Fahrenheit is very, very cold, and 0 degrees and 100 degrees Fahrenheit is very, very hot. 0 is very, very cold, 100 is very, very hot. He said on the Celsius scale, 0 degrees Celsius is pretty chilly, 32 degrees. 100 degrees Celsius, you're dead. You've probably been dead at 55, 60 degrees Celsius. And on the Kelvin scale, 0 degrees is you're dead, and 100 degrees is you're dead. But in Fahrenheit, it's 100 degrees of deviation between really cold, 0 degrees is 32 degrees below freezing, and 100 degrees is a pretty hot day. So I thought that was pretty impressive argument. Now, the reason I bring that up is because certainly the Fahrenheit scale gives us several degrees of temperature in between a degree of Celsius. The Celsius scale is, in terms of habitable scale, pretty much 0 to 50. Fahrenheit 0 to 100, so probably a couple more. So I guess where I'm going with this is this: the more representatives you have in the House, the finer the degree of representation per specific neighborhood, not just state, per specific neighborhood. So on some level, I think it'd be great. I'd love to see on some level increasing and refining that difference. But with that said, I don't know if pretty much a 9,000 seat House is really a good idea. I mean, there comes a point where it is simply just too unruly. I mean, it's hard enough getting 435 people into a room. Just think about seating 9,000 people, and of course you'd lose the House of Representatives chamber, which has a great deal of tradition with it too. So I don't know. I think on some level you can kind of make the case that you probably need to freeze it somewhere. You don't want it to look like the Imperial Senate in Star Wars. I think a bigger issue with the House, to be honest with you, I just can't imagine a 9,000 seat House. I can't imagine how anybody would get to speak. I can't imagine how the committees would work. To me, on a lot of levels, it seems like you'd have less representation simply because you'd have fewer chances to speak, to persuade people. The 9,000 people writing bills, my God, aren't we in enough trouble with 435 people writing bills? I mean, so there's some arguments to be made for the way things are. What I will say, I think, however, is this whole idea of gerrymandering, I would say, has to go. And so how do you get rid of gerrymandering? For those of you who don't know, gerrymandering is the ability to say, well, these are the people in our district, but we're going to draw the lines, we're going to draw this kind of weird jigsaw kind of shape so that we get every single black person or every single white person or every single Hispanic. You're just trying to pack all of your votes into one area so you can win the seat. And I think the only way that you can get around gerrymandering, and I would be in favor of this, would be the only thing that doesn't have an opinion. You could say, well, the Democrats are gerrymandering for a liberal House seat, and the Republicans are gerrymandering for a slightly less liberal House seat. But I think the only way you could really do it would be to do it with, as I say, something that doesn't have an opinion. And the only thing that I know of would be lines of latitude and longitude. I mean, the equator doesn't have an opinion, and the lines of longitude don't have an opinion. I think that all congressional districts ought to be drawn according to lines of latitude and longitude, and there you go. Now, I don't know how you'd weight that for population, but I guess they've got that figured out already. In any event, I would say that the biggest problem with the House right now is not the limited number of representatives. I'd say the problem with the House is how congressional districts are drawn. I just always thought it was wrong and always thought it was just, irrational and unfair, and one of these kind of institutionalized forms of cheating that everybody winks at. And it's a kind of, there isn't, or at least there wasn't, a great deal of corruption in American politics, certainly relative to the rest of the world, but this is one of those things that's been kind of built into America for a long time, this business of drawing our congressional districts to get the vote we want. And it offends me on mathematical and it offends me on, just philosophical issues. It just seems wrong. I think there's got to be a better way. Anyway, there goes Zechariah. There's their fourth time asking, and we always try to get questions on at least the fourth try. Let's see. We're moving on here. We're moving like gangbusters here. We might have time to play around a little bit, to maybe take questions from the comment stream. Who knows? Dave Olson says, presumptive candidate Nick Cruz agrees with agrees with every single one of your core principles except maybe one. Presumptive candidate Henrietta Clanton opposes every one of those principles except maybe one. Would you be willing to give up that one principle to get your guy into office? Which one are you most malleable on, and how many principles could you forego in order to keep Mrs. Clanton out of office? I'd be pretty willing to ban handguns, flying, free speech, and my right to an attorney if I'm being detained. I'd pretty much be willing to set those things on fire to keep Mrs. Clanton out of office. It's actually a serious question. And that's a tough one. I have to interrupt for a second. I'm sorry to do this, especially for those of you watching on YouTube. We have, as you know by now probably, is a live comment stream. And in the comment stream, I got a Bill Rock on from a guy whose screen name is B29 Pilot. And here's why I have to digress. I will come right back to this. I was in Tucson, Arizona last week. Was it last week? Was it earlier this week? I think it was last week. I cannot for the life of me remember. That's how bad things are getting for me in terms of my travel. I was there on Saturday, so in between. I feel a little better. I was in Tucson, Arizona on Saturday, and as we were flying a final approach into Tucson, I looked out the window and I saw what appeared to be a very large propeller airplane out there in the distance. And as we were starting on final, I saw that plane start to roll in as if it was appearing on final. I thought, man, that's he's coming in pretty tight. And then I thought, he's kind of cutting the corner a little bit. Turns out he didn't land. He overflew the airport. I didn't know this at the time. But as we're taxiing back, I'm on the left side of the airplane, left side window. And as we're taxiing back on our little Southwest flight to the terminal at Tucson, I hear the pilot say, ladies and gentlemen, those of you sitting on the right side of the airplane, I went, oh, damn it. He said, you may notice over the mountains over there, it is the last flying B-29 in existence. So beautiful airplane's a beautiful sight. You're really honored to see it, whether you know it or not. And I thought, oh my God, Fifi's here. So I shot out of that airplane and ran into the terminal, and I looked, and I got to look out the window, and I saw it land And then I saw it taxi by, the last flying B-29 Stratofortress, the last of the aircraft that were specifically designed to carry the atom bomb and to bring the bombing war to Germany. So I'm off on a tangent, but you don't get these opportunities every day. So and we did an aviation show last time. The B-29 in many ways was, you could make the case it was the greatest single leap between generations of aircraft. That airplane had unbelievable advances. Cost almost as much as the atomic bomb program itself, damn near as much as the Manhattan project itself. B-29 had, among many other things, it was a pressurized bomber, which was new, kind of nice for those poor guys in the B-17s, the B-24s over Germany. These guys are, it's cold on the ground in the winter in Europe, and especially in World War II. Those were very, very cold winters. And then when you think at, what the temperature is at 20,000, 25,000 feet, it's 20, 30, 40 degrees below zero up there. That's a hard way to fight a war. These guys in the guns, especially the side gunners, I would imagine, open fuselage, it's 40 degrees. They're in heated suits, but my God, man. So pressurizing that aircraft was a big deal. The B-29 had all of its gun turrets. If you look at, I built a lot of models when I was a kid. If you look at the gun turrets on a B-29, the 50 cal, twin 50 cal turrets, they're very small and they're not clear. That's because the B-29 was the first bomber to have a automated sort of a flight targeting director. And one guy would basically track incoming fighters, and he'd pivot. I presume he could select which turrets he would pivot towards. That I don't know for sure, but I would imagine he could. Certainly could put all four of them on there if you wanted to. And so, the B-29 had that. The B-29, actually, most people don't realize this. It may not have been the first airplane to detect it, but on some level, certainly the first airplane to deal with the jet stream. These guys were up there. B-29 was designed for high-altitude precision strategic bombing. And they started taking B-29s up to altitude because they could go higher because they were pressurized. And they were having all kinds of fuel problems because they were fighting a 100-knot headwind that they'd never imagined even existed up there. That jet stream is up there. And all of a sudden you're flying a 100-knot headwind, and you're not doing 500 knots like you are in a commercial jet. You're doing probably 200 knots. So a 100-knot headwind is half. And so, a combination of the jet stream and other things, and the fact that the precision wasn't as what they wanted, caused Curtis LeMay to say that they're going to bring the B-29s in very low and firebomb Japan from low to mid altitude. And that was a bit of a shock for the pilots and a bit of a shock for the Japanese as well. They're a lot more accurate down low. It's a lot more dangerous down low, too. But in any event, I saw a B-29 with my own eyes, and the two things that surprised me about the B-29, really surprised me, were, first of all, it was much darker than I thought it would be. A dark gray. I thought Fifi was in its bare aluminum, and if it was, that was a really dark airplane. But I think the one thing, if you have not seen a B-29, if you're a fan of aviation and World War II aviation, if you've never seen a B-29 or B-17, I think the thing that will really shock you, I mean genuinely shock you, is how small this big plane is. I could not believe how small that plane is. It was big for its day, but when I go to the terminal at LAX to get on a 737, more often than not, just directly out there will be a 767, a 777, a 747. And when you get used to those, when you've seen them for 25, 30, 40 years, 50 years in my case, when that becomes the scale of a big airplane, a 747, 777, all the time, they're just taxiing past you all the time out there at LAX. When you actually see a B-29, it's astonishing how small that plane is compared to modern jets. It's really, really tiny. The B-17 is even smaller. I remember driving up to Visalia in Central California, southern Central California Valley. There were two airplanes, I call them gate guards, aircraft mounted on posts. And one of them was a B-17 and the other, I think, was an F-4. And it was at a really small little airport, really out-of-the-way airport. And I have to tell you, the B-17 and the F-4 are nearly the same size. It might have been an F-15, but I'm quite sure it was an F-4. Point is, a modern fighter-bomber, one-person or two-person aircraft, is very nearly the size of a B-17, very nearly, which had a crew of, I want to say, 11. you know, really small, really small. A couple of people asking me if I'm going to CPAC. I'm not going to CPAC. I'm going to be out of town next week rather, but not at CPAC. But in any event, B-29 pilot here says he's buzzed his house in a B-29, his parents' house in a B-29. I don't know who you are, sir, but you have my undying respect. That is an amazing piece of work. It's an amazing thing to fly. It's an absolute monument to the men that flew it, and flew it beautifully in combat. It's an amazing monument to all the B-29s that ditched at sea, all the ones that never made it back. You know, one of the big advantages to capturing Iwo, and I think maybe one of the main reasons for Iwo, was that Iwo Jima was taken partially because it gave American bombers, returning bombers, a place to land. That airplane had a lot of teething problems, had a lot of problems with its engines, had a lot of mechanical issues. So, bless you, sir, and I don't know how you got that job, but you must know you got to be a special kind of pilot if you're going to be flying the only one in the world. I don't know. I have to tell you, B-29 pilot, I'm not sure that I can't think of a case, I'm sure some people probably can, but I cannot think of a case of anybody who shares that extremely unique, extremely unique is redundant, isn't it? Unique is unique, and I should have said extremely uncommon title. I don't know of anybody else out there who is rated to fly the only type of airplane in the world. It's the only one. There might be one Focke-Wulf flying, but in any event, if you haven't had a chance to see Fifi, go see it. It's just knocked the wind out of you. I was flying my little Sky Arrow home one day along the Malibu coast back to Santa Monica Airport, and I looked at it and saw this is a big 4-engine propeller plane. What the hell's a 4-engine propeller plane? Is that a fire bomber? Sometimes they bring these fire bombers in here, and it was a B-17. Just passed right below me and off my left wing underneath me, and I thought, man, that is a sight to see. So if you haven't been there, you won't be disappointed. Somebody's asking if they can whether we're taking applications for Castor Crew for big gut problems, and we might, but we'll let you know when we do. In any event, back to the question. But that was awesome. So bless you, B-29 pilot. It's a really good question, Dave. What would I be willing to give up? What would I be willing to? What would I not be willing to give up? I have to tell you, folks, I don't know if we can survive another progressive president. I mean, really, it's really shocking. It's really amazing the damage that has been done. And so I'd be willing to say that unless it was a Bill of Rights issue, you probably could get me behind him. In other words, man, I mean, if you want to take the most extreme example, if Ted Cruz, let's say, or Scott Walker were running, but both of them said we're going to keep Obamacare, and Hillary Clinton was saying we're going to repeal Obamacare, then you'd actually have me really, really in a pickle, because I am quite certain that is the worst thing that's happened to this country in a long time. But, I think when I look at the history of what's happened here in the 5 years that this guy's been president, I would say it hasn't been one issue, right? I mean, Obamacare was by far the worst thing that he's done, but he's done so many other awful things. I mean, just the foreign policy debacle with ISIS and selling out our allies in the Ukraine, and they are our allies to the degree that they're Russia's enemy. That makes them our allies. To this disregard with China, to sucking up to our enemies. To of all the things this president's done, I think his failure to back the Green Revolution in Iran in 2009 is the worst dropped ball in foreign policy I've seen since I've been alive. So to answer your question, Dave, I think what I would probably go with is, if I had to pick between these two people, I would probably rather have the person who was 95% of the way with me, even if that one thing that he was against was very, 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 very big to me. I think I'd rather have that than go with the single win of one person who really gave me the one thing I wanted, and then the rest of it was, drivel, because it's not just a one-message election. it's a, it's the whole thing. I mean, a gun control nut. I'd rather have a gun control nut who in every other way was a patriotic conservative, although if you're a gun control nut, you can't be a conservative. I'm sorry, those are exclusionary. But even if that were the case, if I had a solid conservative president who, for some reason, cosmic ray hit a brain cell or something, is gun control lunatic, I think I'd rather have that than a Democrat who was a strong gun rights proponent who, was a communist and everything else. So it's an interesting question, but to be honest with you, I don't know if it's a realistic question. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is such a problem, Dave, right, is that the reason we're losing elections is because we don't have any stated principles, and those that we do have are no different than those of the Democrats. They want a big, expensive government, and the Republicans want a slightly less big, slightly less expensive big government. So I would just say, it may be one of these things like which would win the immovable force versus the irresistible force versus the immovable object. If there is an immovable object, there can be no such thing as an irresistible force and vice versa. Well, it's an interesting question to play with. I don't think we have to go there. I think really all of the beautiful thing about conservatism as it exists today is it's inherently rational and all the pieces locked together. There's nothing about this philosophy that you have to do a little fandango over. I mean, it's, you believe in low taxes and limited government, personal responsibility. You can solve all of the problems we have with these philosophies, and you don't have to lie to people. You don't have to pretend that something isn't real. I mean, I don't have to say, I'm in favor of higher taxes and then instruct my accountant to get me the best tax rate I possibly can. And I don't have to ignore crime rates, and I don't have to pretend about things that I would like to be true but aren't true. It's a superb philosophy, and if we just had somebody who could sell it like they believed it, somebody with a little passion and a little bit of sense of humor and a little bit of information, then it'd be game over. And by the way, somebody just said you almost lost a fan there with the gun issue. Let me just say this: the reason I picked the gun thing is this: you could have the biggest gun control freak of a president in the world right now. And we've had them, and we may have them again. You could have a gigantic gun control freak in the world right now as president, and they're not. They could do an awful lot to basically limit existing gun sales, but they couldn't do anything about what is the number? It's 250 million guns already in existence, right? Most of those people are. Most of those guns are unregistered. Astronerd says you give up your guns and you give up the Constitution. Well, we're keeping our guns, Astronerd, and the Constitution is going in front of our eyes, right? I mean, this is the thing that's probably the most alarming thing about it is we probably have not, certainly not in my lifetime, have we been in a stronger position regarding gun rights. We've never, I mean, the Ninth Circuit Court is approving concealed carry or open carry here in California. I mean, it's unbelievable. The Supreme Court ruling that the right to defense was a personal right and not reserved to the militia, all that stuff. It's tremendous victories for the gun rights people. That makes me very, very happy. But the Constitution is being shredded despite that. So, I think as long as you've got a couple of pieces of shooting iron buried in a sack out in the backyard someplace wrapped up in plastic, I'd rather have somebody who was a one-issue destroyer of the Constitution, even if it was that issue, than somebody who's determined to destroy it all across the board. And one of the things, is one of the things that's really hard to get your mind around is, and I'm slowly coming to this realization, is that we, for our entire history, have thought, as long as we have an armed population, we can defend ourselves against our government. But the question we have to start asking ourselves now is, what are they going to come at us with? It used to be that they'd come at us with pistols or with 6-irons or Winchester rifles. And then if we had a 6-shooter or a Winchester rifle, we had a chance to defend ourselves against these tyrants. But now, while virtually every one of us has an AR-15, I just got mine all dolled up. I put a front grip on it, and I put a 5-power sight and a red dot on top of the 5-power sight. So as long as these jihadis or zombies come at me in a straight line and don't move too much side by side, which I think would be cheating, as long as they come at me more or less a straight line, these guys are in real trouble starting at 300-400 yards. But with all that said, you know, these AR-15s and so-called assault rifles are definitely guaranteed to us. They're not guaranteed to us by the Constitution. We're allowed to have them. Constitution says the government says we're not allowed to take them away from us. But with all that said, excuse me, you have to start asking yourself now if the ability to use, keep and bear arms to defend yourself against tyranny, that's going to have to start including things like anti-tank weapons and Stinger missiles. Because now we're talking about a government that's probably going to be willing to deploy armored vehicles, either tanks or APCs or drones, against citizens. And you know, that just gave me a thought that I'd never had before this very instant. It's a really shocking thought, really quite surprising to me. And that question is this. I think I'm concerned about unmanned drones, and I wasn't before, because I like the idea of using these drones against bad guys without risking our guys. There are some missions that drones are superb for. And this business of loitering over the battlefield at 150 knots for 20 hours, waiting for Sheikh whoever Sheikh Djibouti to come out of his cave or his safe house and then just put a hellfire on his tailpipe. I love that. I think that's really awesome. I think that's great. But the thought that just this second occurred to me, I never really considered before, was this. One of the things that concerns me now is that a drone pilot could pull the trigger on American citizens in a way that I think an Air Force pilot probably would not. In other words, you can get people to fly drones that I would say are significant. I'm not saying that the people who are flying drones now are, but I'm saying it's possible to get somebody to fly a Predator drone who is well beneath the training and without the cultural infusion of the Air Force. In other words, I have a great deal of confidence in our military men and women. I think they're the last bastion not only of our physical protection, I think they're the last bastion of our philosophical and moral protections in this country. When they sign an oath of office, and they understand what this is about. That's why they're risking their lives for it. But I was actually invited several years ago, I would say 2004 or 5, somebody asked me if I wanted to apply. Somebody who worked for General Atomics, who makes the Predator, said, "Do you have a commercial license and an instrument rating?" I said, "I have the instrument rating. I flew to commercial standards. I could get the commercial license in a week if I wanted to." He said, "You ought to think about coming up and flying Predator drones for a living." And I thought, yeah, that'd be kind of fun, popping the button on terrorists. But it occurs to me now that you can find people to fly a Predator who'd probably be willing to put Hellfire missiles on American citizens. And I don't know if you would be able to find Air Force personnel who would do that, because you don't just have the pilot, you have the crew chief, you have the chain of command, you've got all these other things. It's a whole different story. You could have, I can envision, certainly, I'd be amazed if this weren't the case. I'd be astonished if this weren't the case. And somebody in the CIA or somebody in some intelligence operation, someplace somewhere, has these drones, armed drones. And that's an aspect of drones I'd never really thought about, was using them against American citizens. On some level, I suppose I must have thought about it because it's in Big Bad Problems. There's it's the second to last climax where the government starts killing some of our guys in their convoy with Predator drones. But I'd never really fully emotionally realized that an unmanned weapon system is easier to put weapons on the American people than one flown by actual people. Oops. Although Viper check here appears to be F-16 pilot, and I only say appears to be because of the precision of our language. says that the culture has already been degraded in the Air Force and other military services a long time ago, and I know that's true for the Army, so I didn't want to think about that. That's really a horrible thought. Anyway, the right to keep and bear arms may need to be expanded to the right to keep and bear arms, and arms in that case may be anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft missiles. I know some people look at you and say you're out of your mind, or you're talking about, nutty. It's like, well, I don't think the founders were nutty. And the thing is, bear arms. It means carry them. So does that mean you should have a right to a tank? Maybe. But I certainly should have the right to an anti-tank weapon because I can carry one of those. I can bear it. I can bear it. I can put it on my shoulders and bear it across the way. So if I can bear that arm, then hand me off some tow missiles or javelins or whatever you got. Just in case. You never say never. Cheerful, isn't it? The fact that we're having this conversation in America today, it's unbelievable. Kevin Jordan says, when I was in school, they sent us outside for an hour at a time, rain, freeze, or shine, to vent our energy, clamber over rusty, jagged steel, jump out of trees, and learn modern social skills, and now people can't eat gluten. Your thoughts? Well, needless to say, I agree with the sentiment about getting kids out there, and I also think that it's bigger than just the physical, I almost said intimidation, but timidization of people. Why don't we go to a different shot for this one? Here's what I think on this particular issue. Yes, I completely agree with you. Not sending kids outdoors to play is bad for kids. It's bad for their physical condition. There's no question it's bad for their physical health. That's the start. Where can you go from there? Because it's much bigger than that. It's bad for their physical conditioning, and it's bad for their psychological conditioning because they're not facing threats. They're not dealing with danger of any kind. They're not in the environment. They're not in anything unstructured. They're not any of those things. They're just, kept in the little womb of the classroom. So there's the psychological aspect where as you stress people less and less and less, that doesn't make them more able to deal with stress. It makes them less able to deal with stress, needless to say. So you're not doing them any favors there. Third, you are setting up a psychological dependency. You're setting up a psychological weakness where they're just incapable of facing anything. They can't compete. They can't, and they never get hurt. And they never know what it's like to recover from being hurt. They never bang themselves up. So it's like, hey man, what do you say? You cannot protect people forever. What's going to happen to these kids when their parents die? My brother has an extremely autistic child. That'd be my nephew. Very. And he said something that just broke my heart. I mean, he was talking about the amount of care that this kid needs. He's the sweetest kid, terrific kid, very talented young man now. But he said, we can never die. His mom and I can never die. We have to live forever because if we don't, who's going to take care of this kid? And we're doing that to everybody. They're being driven. They're 20 years old. They're 22, 23 years old. They're being driven everywhere by their moms. They're staying with their parents. They don't know how to do laundry. They don't know how to pay bills. They don't know how to shop for groceries. I mean, I came to that game fairly late, but by the time I got to college when I was 18 years old, it's like, where are my clean clothes? Well, you have to go wash them yourself. I have to what? There's nothing in the fridge. Well, that's because you haven't gone out and bought any groceries. I have to go buy groceries. Yes, you do. And by doing things like buying groceries and doing your laundry, traumatic, horrible events like this, you learn how to be an adult. You learn how to grow up. And when, if it's late at night and you don't feel like going to the 24-hour Skaggs Albertsons in Gainesville, Florida in 1980, then don't. When you wake up in the morning, you're going to be hungry. And then maybe you can go then. And this is how you learn lessons, I was thinking about this a little earlier today, actually, how so many of the lessons we learn are just lessons of pain. I mean, it's just that simple. This hurts, so don't do that. These are heuristics, by the way. And that's something that should do a whole show on, actually, this idea of heuristic thinking, the idea that heuristics, unless I misunderstand it completely, are a series of lessons that we learn, and we learn a lesson, and then we use that heuristically so that we don't have to relearn that lesson. We just take that as read, so to speak. For example, if something is glowing red, it's a red hot stove, you put your hand on it, burn your hand, it's like, ooh, that hurt. Now, your amygdala says don't do that again, and you don't have to relearn that a red hot stove burns your hand. That's a heuristic lesson that you learned. So when you see that red hot stove, you don't touch it again. Now, the beautiful thing about heuristics is you can then sort of interpolate from that experience, and then you can say, even though that's not my red hot stove, which I know is hot and hurts when I touch it, it is, however, something else that's red hot. Maybe I shouldn't touch that either. That's a heuristic lesson that you learn, and so on. And so all of our belief systems are based on these heuristic presumptions, because we don't get to learn everything all over again all the time. So, as you get higher and higher up the scale of philosophy, you're making more and more and more assumptions. And this is where liberals and conservatives, I cannot call them liberals anymore. Leftists and conservatives, progressives and conservatives, is where we part company. We part company where our heuristic experiences begin to divide. Both progressives and conservatives, unless they're clinically insane, will agree that you shouldn't touch something that's red hot. That's a simple heuristic lesson that everybody learns, and most of us can agree on this. But as you start to get higher up in the hierarchy of things that you've learned from heuristics, then these positions can diverge, because somebody is starting to count an untried premise as true. That's really what it comes down to, I think. They start to count, kind of an untested or undocumented premise as true. Now, sometimes they'll do that intentionally. Sometimes, whether consciously or subconsciously, they will basically say to themselves, well, this may not be true, but I'd like it to be true. It'd be nice if it were true. Sure would. But that don't make it so. And that puts you in a tough spot when you're trying to deal with the world as the world is. It'd be nice if it were true. It'd be nice if giving poor people money made them rich, but it doesn't. Poverty is a series of very bad decisions. It's not to say it's just bad decisions, but it's largely bad decisions. And when people win, multi-million-dollar lotteries, more often than not, they're stone cold broke and out of a job within 5-10 years, because they didn't learn the lessons that came with the increase in wealth. I know I've told this story before. I was driving a limousine one day back when I got out here in '88 or '89, somewhere in there, and there was a woman in the back seat, and we were driving through South Central, and she lived in San Marino, which is a very upscale neighborhood. South Central, not so much. And she didn't say a word on the whole trip, but she just looked out at this, all of this poverty and garbage everywhere, and iron bars on the windows, and she said, if we took all the people here and moved them into San Marino, and all the people who lived in San Marino moved them here, in a year, this place would look like San Marino, and San Marino would look like this place. Now, a lot of people say it's a very racist thing or a very classist thing to say, but it's really not. Not when you get right down to it. And certainly it doesn't need to be. What she's basically saying is that the people in South Central were performing behaviors and had a certain skill set and a certain attitude that resulted in their neighborhood looking like this, and likewise the people in San Marino had skills and habits and behaviors that had their neighborhood looking as it is. So if you imagine the two switching, it kind of makes sense, right? If you forced people from an upscale neighborhood like San Marino into South Central Los Angeles, the first thing they'd do is start cleaning up. That's the first thing they would do, is they'd start cleaning house. They'd start cleaning the inside of the house. They'd start cleaning the outside of the house. The houses would be smaller, and they would do the best they could to make them as livable as possible. If you put those people in menial jobs, they would do those menial jobs as well as they could and start looking for promotions, start figuring out ways to maybe subcontract out their menial jobs. They'd start using the habits and the skill sets they have to improve their lives in their neighborhoods. And likewise, people without those skill sets and habits would be given mansions and luxurious yards, and we've seen this happen all the time. All you have to do is look at these housing projects. It's got nothing to do with black or white. It's got nothing to do with your ethnicity or your race or anything. It's just what happens when you have the skill sets of poverty versus the skill sets of affluence. It's not the wealth fairy, you know. There's not some wealth fairy that comes and dings certain people in their sleep and says, congratulations, you're rich and you're going to be poor. Too bad for you. Tough break. It's about decisions and habits and skills and modes of behavior. And so what you find is that people who generally live in poverty have very poor ability to plan for the future. They're often living in such... Now, listen, I'm not trying to make this a moral failure exclusively or even primarily. I know what it's like to live hand-to-mouth. And when you live hand-to-mouth, you have very little opportunity to expand yourself. You're usually working so hard just in the treadmill just to keep body and soul together. It's very hard to get ahead and get out of that. But it can be done, and here I am. I mean, So I want to be crystal clear on this point, how we got off this tangent, but I think it's rich territory. I'm not saying, I want to be really clear on this. I'm not saying that if you swap the people from San Marino and South Central, that the people in South Central, that the ability to enrich yourself is something that they have the means of doing and they just don't because they're lazy. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that poor people are poor because, geez, all they have to do is just buckle down and they'd be able to get right out of there. That is true, but it's also true that they have absolutely no ability to do it. And to claim that they do is just not true. So poor people are not poor because they choose to be poor, but they are making choices that make them poor. Isn't that a weird sort of a thing? That's really kind of it. They're not choosing to be poor, but they're making choices that make them poor. And they don't know any better. They've never seen it, and they have nothing to compare it to, and they have nothing to reference it against. I'll say two more things about this. Usually when you go into really bad neighborhoods, it's the drug dealers who are simultaneously the biggest problem and also on some level the best hope. Look, if I was stuck in a neighborhood and I had no way out of there, chances are I'd be dealing drugs too. I'd do it as smart as I could. What would you do? I mean, you know, drug dealing is an entrepreneurial operation. They're businessmen. They're brutal businessmen. They're in a brutal environment, and it's a brutal business. On some level, the drug dealers are the smartest people in the ghettos, and on some level, they're the ones who should be the most heavily recruited to turn things around. The actual damage is done by the addicts who are so desperate for this hit, and it's not just a psychological hit. I mean, I've read a couple of really remarkable books lately, and one of them was called The Coroner by David Simon, who's a big old liberal. That's okay with me. He wrote Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which was a year with the Baltimore Police Department. Then he wrote a book called The Coroner, which was about a year in the drug culture in Baltimore. And his point was there's a corner everywhere, that every town in America has a corner where you can go buy drugs. And he was talking about the fact that prior to the 80s, you had heroin junkies. And a heroin junkie was a guy who would, get his boost and then he'd just be out for the day. I mean, be gone for the day or 2 days. He said when crack cocaine came along, you would find people who would come back and hit the same dealer 3, 4, 5 times an hour, and that the physical dependency on that high, the actual physical addiction was so overwhelming that you become a dope fiend, and it's easy to look at people who are dope fiends and say, well, just pull yourself together, man, but I've been in rooms full of dope fiends for a long time, and it's not that easy. It's some cases the chemical addiction is so strong that it's simply overpowering, and if you've never been in a situation like that, then I am extremely happy to hear it, and you should be very grateful, because there are things that are overpowering. It'll make you lose your family, make you lose your self-respect, your pride, your job, your car, your house, your everything. You will lose it all if something becomes that powerful over you, and for many, many, many people, this is that. So, these are complex issues. But I think the way to solve them primarily, if somebody said to me, Bill, we really want to do something, real, about the drug epidemic and the crime epidemic and the violence epidemic, what I would do is I would take the people, if I had dictatorial powers, and I don't want dictatorial powers, but if you wanted to really solve it, I think the thing to do would be to take these worst ghettos and disperse them into the larger population. Now, some people had a problem with what I said about the drug dealers being the smartest people. They're certainly the most evil, and I'm not trying to claim that they're not. They are the most evil. They are the ones who are consciously ruining lives in order to make a buck. Got it. But those are also the smartest people. And so, anyway, you know, I actually kind of want to stay here for a minute because I've been thinking these thoughts for quite a while. A lot of times getting them out is important. I haven't had a chance to really say them aloud. You know, it's easy to look at the crime and the addiction in these inner cities as a sort of a failure of many things, and it is. It's a failure of family. It's a failure of religion. It's a failure of all of these things. And what it really is, not exclusively, but a lot of it is a failure of economic opportunities. Again, not exclusively. One of the key story in The Corner is a true story of a guy named Gary McCullough, who was, by all accounts, a really bright young black man, and went to Ohio State, was going to be an engineer, superbly bright, very well educated, extremely well-read man, good man too, whose father basically worked his way into Baltimore from a farm, you know, where he was essentially working on a plantation in either North Carolina or South Carolina. Took his family to Baltimore, raised 15 kids in Baltimore, never broke the law a day in his life, talked about how the neighborhoods in Baltimore used to be when he arrived in 1955, how black and white people maybe didn't live like cheek and jowl, but certainly got along, and everybody was friendly, and there was not a whole lot of crime because most people had good jobs. And then the destruction of our inner cities, really, I didn't really understand this until I got to this book. Now, somebody's just say that's the way progressives think. Well, I'm telling you, I've been in Narcotics Anonymous for a year, so I don't know if you have or not, but I have, and I'm telling you that there are certain things that are beyond your ability to control, at least on your own, and that there is an awful lot of power in these addictions, an awful lot. And that while we can look at some of these things and say, well, I just would do this, 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 and this, that's lovely. But the fact of the matter is, we know how to do these things, and they don't. That doesn't mean there's not a moral decision on some level and a responsibility. I'm not saying they're not responsible, but I am saying it's not as easy as it looks. In any event, what this guy's point was, and I think it's a really good point, is that basically what happened, and I hadn't put these things together clearly enough, but without question, America's turned to a third wave information age economy. And there's nothing that you can do to stop that. It's as inevitable as anything else. There was a great deal of resistance to the Industrial Revolution with the Luddites. They just wanted to have the farm life, and the idea of all these factories and machines was terribly intimidating to them. But there's nothing you can do about it. This is bigger than empires. It's bigger than nations. It's gigantic, enormous cultural forces at work. And so the world changed when the industrial era happened, and then the world changed again when the information age happened. And as the information age swept through America, like it or not, we began to make enough money in the information age that we could afford to buy things, and those things could be manufactured more cheaply overseas because the labor costs were so much lower. And we started buying those things, and we stopped manufacturing things in this country for very, very enormous reasons. People will buy a $29 drill over an $89 drill, and I don't blame them. In any event, what's basically happened is this expanding conversion from the industrial era to the information era washed across the country, and the place it didn't penetrate were mostly the inner cities, because people of limited education background and limited intelligence background. And not to denigrate anybody who works on an assembly line, because I have enormous respect for the hard work that entails. I have 7 generations of people in my family who are cotton carders in textile mills, so you're not going to get any kind of elitist snobbery out of me on this one. But it is easier to teach somebody to perform a skill on an assembly line than it is to teach them how to run a computer, be a graphics designer, or you know, be an account manager for an insurance company. And I want to come to this point that somebody else just made here in a second. So this economic change blew past these cities and left people who would formerly have decent jobs and decent pay as industrial workers with nothing to do and no way to get there. And as the education system is run by Democrats and progressives, and it's just one giant pay scheme, you know, all the money that was left was going into the government. No one had any private sector jobs, and the schools got worse and the education got worse. The chance of getting a job got lower. So you turn to crime and you turn to drugs. There's your chance of getting a job even lower. And it's this death spiral, and somebody has to break it up. Somebody has to stop it or be prepared for the consequences. Now, what we see going on in the comment stream was somebody was saying that progressives think that the answer is to put people, poor people out with rich people, and then he went on to say that they want to do this by law. Now, I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm against coercion in every form. I don't think you should be doing it by law, but if you wanted to solve the problem, I wouldn't put poor people next to rich people as a way of punishing them or as a way of punishing the rich or as a way of ginning up the poor people. I would do what I saw the Mormons do, basically. When I went to Salt Lake City back in 2009 or 10, I got a tour of Welfare Square, which is their sort of their public works thing, and it's spotlessly clean. You could eat off the floor. They're canning food. They're storing food. They're shipping food all around the world without getting any credit. They just all this hate directed their way. But basically, what they do is when somebody is indigent, they don't give them a check. They give them a job, and they give them a job in the factory, and they take home a paycheck, which is nice. So they have the self-respect that comes with a job. So they're working from the beginning, and they're earning their money, which means that since they earned it, it's theirs, and it means that they don't have to have resentment, like, where's the rest of my money? So there's that aspect. But the other things, that, unless I missed my understanding, that the Mormons do is the Mormons put these people in with other families. They don't force them and they don't bust them into their neighborhood so much as they sponsor them, as you might sponsor somebody in an AA or an NA meeting. And so what happens then is that these people with these very poor habits, very poor skill sets, are surrounded by people who know how to do things like cook rice and chicken. So instead of spending $5 on a McDonald's hamburger, $5 buys a lot of rice and chicken. It's much better for you. Most people don't know how to do it. They've never had to do it. They don't have pots and pans, so they help them with these things. And then all of a sudden, over the course of years, the skills of the healthy community are imparted into the people that didn't have the skills through osmosis and imitation and support. And there's nothing coercive about that. I don't want to be misunderstood about this. I don't think we should just be busing people into rich neighborhoods just to make things worse. I'm saying if you want to solve this problem, you really have to start thinking about adopting a poor family voluntarily and teaching them how not to be poor, teaching them how to do things like plan ahead, set aside some money, teaching them about things like education and why that's important, and teach people how to be interested in things. And by the way, a big part of this, if you wanted to get really serious about it, a big part of this would be triage. It's the way you have to do anything of any magnitude. When you're faced with a catastrophe of the magnitude that we're facing socially as a result of these progressive policies of just giving people stuff, bribing them to not riot, basically. If you really, really, really wanted to fix this problem, you could do it, but you'd have to start with a very, very clean slate. And one of the things that you'd have to do is triage. When you have a problem that is so large that you do not have the resources to tackle all of it, you have to do some form of triage, and this is what we'd have to do as well. So triage in this case would be what triage would be in a case of a medical catastrophe. If we've got a hospital with 50 beds in it and we've got 1,000 badly injured people, 1,000 injured people show up at the door. Triage is pretty simple, really, when you get right down to it. Triage says, okay, you are so lightly injured that you're not about to die. I know it hurts. If we have an aspirin, we'll give you an aspirin, put a bandage on this guy's hand, keep him in the emergency room. He may be in that emergency room for hours or days, but he's not going to die. So the people who are not terribly badly injured don't get treated right away because we have limited treatment ability. Triage also says that there are some people who will die whether they get treatment or not. These people are mortally wounded. They're fatally damaged. And therefore, spending resources on them is a waste of resources, because if we can't save them, then the resources that we're going to deploy on these people and have them die anyway could be used to save people's lives. So triage means three parts, right? So the first part is the people who are so lightly wounded that they don't need immediate critical care can go sit over there and wait. Another group of people who are so badly injured that all the care in the world isn't going to save them can go over there and die in comfort if we can pull it off, if we can give them some morphine or something. And that means that the limited resources that we have are applied to where they'll do the most good. People whose lives could be saved with the treatment. And if you want to look at the situation in terms of society right now, then triage is where we need to be. I mean, if you really want to look at it with the brass tacks, conservative, clear-eyed vision of what the world is today, I would have to say that if we were to go at these problems of poverty and drug addiction, and they're closely related problems, you're talking about a generational effort. It's something that's going to take 25 or 30 years to pull off. And the first thing you have to do is you have to do triage. That means that there are people out there right now in our inner cities who are violent, vicious, murdering psychopaths. There's plenty of good reasons maybe for why they became that way, but that's not within our power to go back and fix. These people need to be treated in the harshest possible terms. They need to be incarcerated for the rest of their lives, and if there's a treatment program that we can afford in a prison that can turn around 2, 3, 4, 5, 10% of those people, that's a win. But generally speaking, there are psychopathic murderers on the streets of this country. And those people need to be locked up and put away forever so they can't hurt anybody else. Likewise, out there are people who need just a little bit of help, maybe just need a little stimulus. Maybe you're going to make it harder for them to get their benefits. When we did the welfare reform in the 90s, we found that by making it harder to get welfare, significant percentage of the total welfare roll just didn't show up. They just didn't come to collect their checks because now I have to prove I'm going looking for a job. Forget it. So they didn't really need the money that badly in the first place. So that kind of triage on the lightly wounded end. So the heavily wounded people, the psychopaths, they got to be locked up. The people who need a little stimulus, a little cattle prod, kind of a little shock to get to work, great, let's do that. And smack dab in the middle are the people who we need to dedicate resources to, and those resources need to be directed to teaching them the skills of being not rich necessarily, but at least middle class. One of the things I read about this subject was so shocking and so disturbing. I read, a couple years ago. I read it online, of course, so I have no way to track it back. But there was a guy in San Francisco, basically just a rich progressive, not rich, but self-sufficient. And he wanted to find out what poverty was like. And you got to give him credit for guts. So this guy, who was basically middle class or maybe even upper middle class, kind of a liberal intellectual, just went off the grid. And he started living in public housing in San Francisco. He started living among the poorest, most violent Americans. And he had enough credibility and maybe enough of the right attitude so that he wasn't, killed immediately. And he started to get to know these people and be accepted by people. And as I was reading his essays, the thing that struck me so strongly, and the thing that struck him so strongly, was just how poor people are at making decisions, just how very little follow-through there is. For example, he said somebody found a newish couch or something on the side of the road or something, and they brought the new couch up to the apartment, took the old couch out into this narrow little apartment corridor, and left it outside their door on the 4th floor or something like this. And for a year, people had to walk over this couch because nobody had the vision or the effort or the cooperation or anything to carry the damn thing down and put it out in the garbage. So people just climbed over this couch and you're carrying bags of groceries and you're stepping over this couch because no one had the ability, the habits or the standards to get the old garbage out of the way. And so if the building catches fire, then people are going to die, and nobody did it. And it's one of the things that you really want to get down to brass tacks now. You really, 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 really want to get to brass tacks. Where you really have to go with this ultimately is you have to look at the one-to-one correlation between poverty, crime, and IQ. The correlation is astonishingly high. It's astonishingly high. So, you are mostly dealing. One of the reasons people become criminals is because they do not have the ability, forget the habit, they don't have the ability to think in the future. When you interview career criminals, lower level street criminals, what you find is that somebody will do something, you'll steal something, and said, well, didn't you know there was a surveillance camera there? Yeah, but I wanted the Xbox. But you knew there was a surveillance camera there, right? And that somebody was watching. Yeah, but I wanted the Xbox. But you'd already been arrested, so that it'd be possible to match your picture with something, and they can't connect the two. They can't foresee it, which is why so many criminals are extremely low IQ people. Somebody was talking about this with somebody once, and somebody said, and by the way, this idea of the master criminal, the mastermind criminal, is fiction. Doesn't exist. It's it's an Arthur Conan Doyle invention, Professor Moriarty. Because if Moriarty were really that smart, he'd be making a lot of money in business. So I don't know where we got off on this track, but it's a good track to be off on. It's a very serious issue, but you have to. If you're serious about it, you have to be serious. You have to speak openly and honestly and truthfully. So, what do? You can't do much about IQ. IQ is actual genuine IQ now is largely inherited and inheritable, and is essentially, it's like height, right? I mean, you can't make short people taller. And height, like IQ, is a standard, is a bell curve distribution. There's very few very, very short people. There's very few very, very tall people. And in the middle are people of more or less average height, and so on. It's the same thing with IQ. IQ breaks out the same way. So what you can do, though, while you can't really do much about IQ, you can do an awful, awful, awful lot about behavior. And take Baltimore, for example. In 1955, there's certainly no big genetic drift in IQ between Baltimore in the 1970s and Baltimore in the 2010s. I mean, the ethnic mix was more or less the same, and everything was more or less the same. But in Baltimore in the 1970s, Baltimore may have been a little economically depressed, but it wasn't the war zone that we see today. The reason it's become the war zone we see today is because of addiction through things like crack, but that's also as a result of a lack of jobs, and it's a result of habits. It's a result of bad habits. So, these are the things that have to be addressed. And, well, look, they don't have to be addressed. We can leave them alone if we want to. I'd like to solve the crime problem because I don't like crime. I'd like to solve the crime and the welfare problem because 2/3 of every dollar I send in on taxes are going to somebody else. We could run the government on, 60% of the total revenues that we spend are on entitlements. So I'd like to stop this for my own personal self-interest. I'd like to stop it because they are people, and people shouldn't have to live that way. And I'm not all about these big social engineering programs. On the contrary, the reason we're in this kind of trouble is because of these big social engineering problems. I do think, however, that when you get right down to the root cause of poverty and crime, they are the results of behaviors that are almost default behaviors of the human condition. Somebody, happy coincidence, just put up the Robert Heinlein quote, M2 Foster put up, poverty is the normal condition of man. It is. So I don't mean to suggest that the decisions that make you poor or are learned. It's the decisions that make you rich that are learned. Poverty is the default state of people. All you have to do is go to the third world and see this village with a sewer in the middle of it, and it's a reason that sewer's running through the middle of the village and not underground in a pipe is because the sewer's always been in the middle of the village. It's the default condition of people. And that's what I see happening in America right now. It's why I'm conservative, because things are running down. Things aren't getting better, they're getting worse. Look at the Academy Awards. These clowns are not the same kind of things that were there 30, 40 years ago. You ever see the recent Comedy Central roasts compared to the Dean Martin roasts? The people are no-name people throwing insults at people they've never met to other people with no talent. Boom. Things are running down. Things are getting worse. The cities are getting worse. And if you looked at Baltimore, if you saw if you're really interested, and I can't recommend this highly enough, by the way, just go to YouTube and search for The Coroner, which is the 6-part HBO series that David Simon's book was made into. It was done in the year 2000. And it's got French subtitles, but it's free, and it's all there. One of the things that's so effective about the dramatization of The Coroner is that there are frequent flashbacks to what Baltimore used to be like in 1955 and in 1970, even 1980 and 1990, and it wasn't what it is today. When you see the flashbacks of Baltimore in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and then you cut to what Baltimore was like even in the year 2000, it looks like The Walking Dead. It looks like some sort of virus or bomb or radiation or an asteroid struck or some disease happened or there was a solar flare. You look at what American cities have become, they look like this post-apocalyptic dystopia that you see in Mad Max. And it wasn't always this way. And there wasn't a nuclear war, and there wasn't a plague of locusts, and there wasn't a solar flare or an asteroid impact, and there wasn't a virus that killed, 90% of the population. What happened was the economy changed and democratic policies kept pumping minimum amounts of food pellets into these neighborhoods, and when you've got nothing but despair, drugs are a lovely way to escape. I imagine they're a lovely way to escape. I don't imagine it's very lovely at all. In fact, I bet it's a miserable way to escape. Come to think of it, it's just all there is. Right? So no one's talking about these issues on this level. No one is talking about these issues on this level. And I would say there's nothing contradictory about any of this. If I were to try to solve these issues, or at least improve them, because you'll never solve them, but if you could improve them, I would use all of my conservative principles, and I wouldn't violate any one of them. I would basically ask people in the country to volunteer to adopt and adapt. Perfect. Adopt and adapt a poor family. And that's going to require some responsibility, because some of these people are going to have very, very poor choices. Some people are going to get burned by this, and some people may even get killed by it. But the generosity of the American people is overwhelming. And if you put the case to them that we can not only help ourselves as a nation and help these people as individuals, but we can awaken people and fill them with the kind of life that we experience, you'd find a fair amount of gratitude out there too, I tell you that. So, that would be the deal I would make to the American people as president. I would say, look, we are not going to tolerate what we've got right now. This is not a tolerable situation. It's not tolerable for those of us who are paying taxes to support it. It's not tolerable for those of us who are victims of crime to maintain it. And it's especially not tolerable to the, believe it or not, majority of people who have to live in these neighborhoods. So we're going to do something about it. And here's the deal. We're going to offer a voluntary escape route for those who want it. Voluntary. We're going to go to the American people and ask for their charity and some help in getting these people into environments and societies where people make decent decisions, where they can have some hope and some security and some safety and some support. And for those of them who don't want to take it, then you need to understand that we're not going to tolerate the crime anymore. And you just get serious about this. And if that means having to triple the number of prisons, then that's what we have to do. And turn them into schools after that cohort dies out. That's it, folks. But nobody's having this conversation. And there are a big part of this is how many people can we employ, because ultimately if they're not employable, then it's just a matter of which state of dependency are they on for the rest of their lives. The information age isn't going to go away. Some manufacturing, in fact, I'll bet you a lot of manufacturing could come back to America. It'd be a wonderful thing. It'd be a great thing for this country and for the people of this country to bring manufacturing back. But again, you cannot ask Americans or anyone else in the world to pick an $89 drill over a $29 drill in order to take one on the chin. It doesn't work that way. Shouldn't have to work that way. I've said before, China is taking, China and now all the rest of the countries too, because even China's getting expensive, taking all these manufacturing jobs because their labor costs are so low. You can't ask Americans to work for $4 a day. You can't live like that in this country. There's no way to go. So what you can do, though, is if a pair of shoes costs $100 and China can make them for $30 and sell them for $100 because they've got cheap labor, if we can use our incredible energy resources, then while our labor costs may be higher, we could still make a pair of $30 shoes because we can use lower energy costs to offset, partially offset, maybe even increasingly offset these things. Then we can start making things in this country again because we can make them competitive on the world market. And, I say let's give it a try, because it's not just the cost of labor. It's the cost of energy. It's the cost of resources, the cost of transportation. All these things are built into the cost of a pair of shoes or a pair of anything else. So, certainly if we made energy cheap and available, and it's under our feet, it's not like we are purposely blocking ourselves. We're putting shackles on our own legs. If we were to free up energy reserves in this country and make energy cheap, clean, and affordable, and I mean really affordable, really cheap, really clean, if you have virtually free energy, you have a thorium reactor underneath these factories, and they're smaller factories, not big industrial factories. I want to spread this thing out. I want to get these cities spread out. I want to spread the working force, the manufacturing force, out into the population voluntarily. Here's a factory. We make things, and we give people jobs, and instead of employing 10,000 people, we employ 70 people or 100 people or 120. Boom, spread it out. You could probably get an awful lot of these problems solved. So there you go. Anyway, something to think about and something to discuss in the future. Yeah, how we got there and going outside, I don't know, Kevin, but you certainly got me going, so I appreciate that. Looks like we got 3 to go tonight. Carlton Hines says, my question is related to this picture. And he included a picture, which I will now include for you. I try to find a higher resolution thing, but basically there's Nixon, it says, faced impeachment for Watergate scandal. There's Clinton, it says, faced impeachment for obstruction of justice, perjury, and then Obama does not face impeachment for fast and furious IRS targeting. IRS targeting, somebody scandal, EPA targeting, Benghazi, NSA spying, journalist wiretapping, Bowie Bergdahl scandal, and illegal implementation of Obamacare. So basically, what he's saying is Nixon had, a break-in in a hotel room, a minor burglary where nobody was killed, and Nixon was impeached and frankly deserved to be impeached. Nixon was impeached for the cover-up you don't get to authorize break-ins into other political parties in this country and then cover them up and get away with it. This is a nation of laws, and broke the law. So while I think Nixon was a much better president than many people give him credit for, seems like that might have been an impeachable offense to me. For those who say that Bill Clinton was impeached because of a certain sexual act, no. Bill Clinton was impeached for lying under oath. If you swear an oath to be the president of the United States, and if you swear an oath to tell the truth and raise your hand on both cases, and you break one oath, how do we know you're not going to break the other? You could make the case he deserved to be impeached. And then, of course, all these things that Barack Obama has done for which he wasn't impeached. So basically, Carlton's question was, my question was related to that picture. Isn't it racist to not hold a black person or half black to the same standard that we would hold a white person? I'm not asking for Barack Obama to be impeached per se. I kind of am. And yeah, it is. See, this is the difference between us and the progressives. The progressives accuse us of racism because we want to hold Barack Obama to the same standards of everybody else. That's pretty much the way I view it. And I've been getting a lot of flack about the Ferguson videos and the rest of the stuff. I'll get flack for the stuff I said earlier tonight. But that's not out of hatred for black people or poor people. On the contrary, it's out of love for them. It's out of a love for them as our fellow American citizens. It's the toleration of these things that has gotten us all these troubles. If Barack Obama were a Republican, he wouldn't get away with it because the press would be on him if he were a Republican. And I don't have a problem with that. That's the press's job. The job of the press is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, and they are not doing their job. I would rather have a press that's going after both my president and the Democratic president really hard than one that left my president alone and the Democratic president alone, not only because of the crimes that the Democrat would commit, but because of the crimes that the Republican would commit. This is our entire theory of people, right? Our entire theory of people is that, power corrupts, and I don't think Republicans or conservatives are immune to the corruptions of power. Obviously, they're not. That's why I want a vigilant press corps on both sides of the aisle. I want a press corps that's going after everybody who's in power, no matter what party they're a part of. But that's not the way it is. Progressives in journalism, and that's virtually all of them. Just look at Cheryl Atkinson to find out what happens if you want to be a real journalist who undoubtedly was a liberal and Democrat and just felt compelled to tell the truth out of some sense of nostalgia, I suppose. Loses her job because she can't tell the stories because the progressives are telling her what news to cover and what news not to cover. Why is it that Barack Obama commits these crimes and is not impeached? It's because he's black. And it's that simple, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. He never would have been president if he weren't half black. Everybody knows it. Geraldine Ferraro, that patron saint of the Democratic Party until she had the audacity to say what everybody knows to be true, came out and said, we never have heard of this guy who wasn't black. She was demonized and vilified. All of her friends left her, and she died shortly thereafter. So, there you go. And this is what runs the conspiracy thing backwards for me, and I don't agree. I don't agree with conspiracy theories. Virtually all of them are, I think, forms of anywhere from mild to severe insanity. But in this particular case, Barack Obama as an individual certainly appealed to the progressives in power, including guys like George Soros with the means to do something about it, because he was perfect for them. He was malleable. And the main reason he was malleable, two main reasons, is first of all, he wasn't very smart. Well, three main reasons. Barack Obama was an ideal candidate for the progressive left because, number one, he wasn't very smart. What did you just say? You heard me. He wasn't very smart. Well, he was the president of the Harvard Law Review. He never wrote any law reviews. And I used to say that for many years. I used to say that, Barack Obama never wrote any law reviews. And I thought, that just doesn't seem to make much sense. And I realized, of course he wrote law reviews when he was at Harvard. They just never published any of them. And the reason they didn't publish any of them was because they were unpublishable. They were unpublishable because he's not very smart. Compared to Harvard Law, he's not very smart. So that's one quality that made him not only acceptable, but like a gold mine to the progressive left. Was a guy who thought he was really smart and had the ability to convince people he was smart, but wasn't really all that smart. That's number one. The second thing that he had going for him was that he was a narcissist, which meant that he could be very easily manipulated. That's the thing about narcissists, That's why so many rock and rollers end up having managers run off with all their money. You hear the story all the time. Some guy, is some artist of some kind, a movie star, a rock singer. And then you find out that his manager, who's been his best friend for all these years, has just gone off to Mexico with $50 million, and now the guy owes $12 million in taxes to the government, doesn't have a penny left to his name. It's not because they're stupid, and it's not even because they're trusting. It's because they're so narcissistic that the manager understood that all I had to do was tell this person what he or she wanted to hear and make life conform to their wishes long enough. And once I do that over a period of time, they'll give me the keys to the kingdom because their narcissism trumps everything. So as long as I'm flattering them and as long as I'm making the girls or the drugs or whatever they want or the booze appear, then they're going to love me because I'm feeding their primary psychological need, which is narcissism. And now I have all the bank account statements and I have signing privileges. And next thing you know, I've got $50 million of this guy's money and I'm out of here. So the narcissism of Barack Obama made him easily manipulatable. And there's a lot of other evidence, too, that's kind of compelling when you take it in aggregate. For example, I think one of the most telling things, and the reason it must be pretty compelling is because the media buried it, but the thing that I think really is interesting is that it is undisputed that the autobiography, or rather the biographical sketch on the back of Barack Obama's books, said that he was a Kenyan writer. For 19 years, the biography on the back flap of his book said that Barack Obama was a Kenyan writer and an exchange student. And then when it was finally revealed by Breitbart that this was the case, then somebody at the publishing house said, oh, no, that was an assistant editor's mistake. He had a Kenyan father, and she thought he was Kenyan, but no, it was a mistake, and that Barack Obama didn't even know that was on there. So let me tell you something, folks. I would not describe myself as a pathological narcissist. I would just describe myself as somebody who's more than average vain. But I wouldn't describe myself as pathologically narcissistic. I would just say I'm more vain than average. But even me, who has some shreds of humility still in him, when I look at a book that I've published, I look at every section of that book. I look at it quite a lot. I check everything. It is absolutely beyond imagining, and everybody knows this is true. It's not up for discussion. You're trying to tell me that a man as narcissistic as Barack Obama went 19 years without ever glancing at the back flap of his bio on the back of books with his name on the front? It's absolutely, utterly, 100% completely absurd. So, whether or not Barack Obama is Kenyan, and I don't suspect that he is, but he wanted people to believe that he was. He wanted people to believe that he was an exchange student. I suspect it's more than possible that he did not have his citizenship renewed I think it's probably likely that he was born in Hawaii, although there are some serious problems with that birth certificate, and they just, they played rope-a-dope perfectly there. They gave you a limited birth certificate and people raised hell about it. Then they gave you a more complete one after 2 or 3 years, after everybody was, having a, seizure over it, and said, ha, 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 stupid birthers, here's the real birth certificate. Now you shut up, right? Well, the second birth certificate is not very impressive either. Put that aside for a minute. Let's just assume he was born in Hawaii. There's an awful lot in his background, like the biography flap on the back of his books. There's no way to explain that, folks. I mean, it's not up for discussion, and there is no way that you can make a case that the author of these books didn't read his own biography. You can say maybe on one printing, maybe, but over 19 years on a series of books, it's nuts. It's just not believable. So he wanted people to think he was a Kenyan. And he wanted people to think he was a Kenyan because he had very limited aspirations. He's quite a lazy man, really, when you get right down to it. He's a very lazy man. And I think he thought that his best shot at any kind of success or any kind of notoriety or any kind of whatever was to do what he did, which was pull a publishing scam. Those of you that know the story of Barack Obama and Dreams from My Father know that some things are indisputable. There's some stuff that's not indisputable, but it's a lot more interesting. But what is indisputable was that he was given an enormous advance, huge advance, for an unknown person, really, to write this book, I think, about race in America. And he delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and then he blew through the deadline and took the money, spent all the money, blew through the deadline, and then all of a sudden, months after the deadline was due, along comes Dreams for My Father, which was beautifully written and so on and so forth. And when you compare Dreams for My Father with The Audacity of Hope, it doesn't look like it's written by the same person. When you compare Dreams for My Father with other things that Barack Obama wrote, it doesn't look like it's written by the same person. There's a pretty compelling case out there, and I don't genuinely go for these kind of things, but this has enough evidence to at least have my attention. I forget who did it. Somebody's going to point it out in the comments section. I hope somebody will, because I want to credit this guy. Made a pretty compelling case that Dreams for My Father was written by Bill Ayers. And Bill Ayers was confronted about this, and Bill Ayers kind of smirked and said, yes, of course I wrote it, ha, ha, ha. But that's kind of how you would handle it, right? What I'm trying to say there is, it seems very likely that really almost as late as the 2008 election, I mean, really you might be talking about 2006, 2007, Barack Obama never thought he'd rise higher than state senator, maybe thought he'd be mayor of Chicago someday, but all of a sudden it began to wake up. Everybody began to realize, no, man, you can go all the way with this thing. And then all of this backstory had to be cleaned up. And it has been cleaned up. So he's ideal for them because he's lazy. I mean, being a community organizer is not a big deal. And by the way, it's all this stuff with Barack Obama. He got this multi-million-dollar house from Tony Rezko, or I don't know if it was multi-million dollars, but an expensive house for very little money through his connections with Tony Rezko. His wife got a job at a hospital. They invented a job for her for like $300,000 a year, right when Barack Obama was writing legislation that affected that hospital. And when she was done with the job, she quit the job, and then the job just disappeared. The job just went away. And all of this stuff has always been just doors open for him from across the street. So he's very lazy, he's very narcissistic, and he's not very bright. He's perfect. And the reason I go through this whole song and dance is to say that the progressives, who've been trying to achieve these goals now for half a century, understood that if he was black, he'd be immune. He'd be immune. That this charge of racism is so powerful, and it's only powerful because American people are not racist. If they were racist, then they wouldn't be shutting up. If somebody accused them of racism, they wouldn't shut up. They say, well, of course I'm racist. Don't you see the hood and the armband? So I think the progressive left realized that this guy was their answer, that they could accomplish things with him that would give them immunity. And the immunity would be, if they start to criticize us or even start looking into us, we'll accuse them of being racist, and that will work. And it has worked. I think there's some signs to indicate that it's starting to wear off. He's getting scrutiny in areas that he wasn't getting scrutiny before. But likewise, he can afford to be more reckless now. I mean, he didn't have to worry about re-election after 2012, and after 2014, he didn't have to even worry about his party anymore. I think I think he's going to get more and more bold. I mean, he just blanket amnestied these people with executive order. He said 12 times he didn't have the power to do it. Then all of a sudden he thought, well, why not? Let's see what happens. And people got all huffy and outraged like me, and he did it, and he got away with it. So what's he going to do next? Because he knows he can get away with this kind of thing now. And here we are. I think it's Jack Keishel. That sounds right. Little things, by the way. I think Keishel said if you do an analysis of Bill Ayers, who served in the Merchant Marine, apparently, there's a lot of nautical references in Bill Ayers' work, and there's nautical references in Dreams from My Father, but Barack Obama's never been anywhere near the water. And fascination with, is it nostrils or something? I don't know. Apparently, Keishel did a computer. They have computers that will analyze your writing and give you an idea of what grade level you're writing at. And also, by analyzing simple things like the types of analogies that you're using and the kinds of language and the names and the places. Also, in terms of sentence structure, you can start to narrow down why. And the kind of the key thing, I think, in Dreams from My Father is this sort of relationship that Barack Obama apparently had with this white student when he was in college. And he never gets very specific, and then the white student did this and this and this, and it turns out there's an awful lot of overlap between this fictional story and Bill Ayers' fascination with this one girl. He ended up marrying, what's her name? But that's not who he was crazy in love with this woman who he ended up getting killed because she died in a bomb factory that he was putting together. Thank you, Bill. You're a wonderful man. But his fascination with this girl and this story he told about this girl kind of shows up in Dreams from My Father as one of Obama's sort of things. When they started questioning Obama about this person, he couldn't come up with any names or any details, and then he admitted that she was a composite of people that he'd known. Okay. You know, you write an autobiography and you talk about things that happened in your life, and I dated this girl named Susie, and we did this, and we went sailing in the Caribbean, and I asked her to marry me on the steps of the Colosseum in Rome. And then it turns out that, you've never been to the Colosseum and you've never been on a sailboat. And then when somebody calls me on it, it's like, oh, it's a composite of different people I had in my life. It's not believable. Anyway, Carlton, that's it, right? They knew that this would be their ultimate inoculation against criticism and against action. And when both Mitch McConnell and John Boehner say that impeachment is off the table, why are they saying it's off the table? Is impeachment off the table for any one of the other 43 presidents we've had prior to Barack Obama? No, it wasn't off the table. So when you basically tell this man who's got a history of breaking the law that our ultimate enforcement action will not be used against you no matter what, is that wise? And number two, why would you do that with this one president and not with the other 43? Bernadine Dorn is the person he married, and the woman who died in the explosion, I'm sure, will come up from the hive mind in just a second here. But do you really want to tell this man? Forget about Barack Obama, forget about John Boehner, and forget about Mitch McConnell. Just go back to the structure of the country. Does the congressional leadership want to tell the chief executive that the only real power we have over him is the power of impeachment, and we are not going to use that power under any circumstances? Is this wise for the separation of powers? Is it a wise thing to do? It wouldn't have been a wise thing to do if Nancy Pelosi threatened it again, or basically said to George Bush, you know what, Mr. Bush, we disagree with you on this Iraq war. We just want you to know, though, however, impeachment's off the table. Is that a wise thing to do? I don't think it's wise. I don't believe that we're incapable of error or crime. I think we're as capable as anybody else. Well, not as anybody else, but we're capable of it. So there you go. Anyway, it's a catastrophe, Carlton. It's going to get worse. 2 to go, and then we'll call it a night, I think. 2 hours. We spent an hour, almost 40 minutes on that poverty thing, which I thought was fun stuff. Samuel Hendricks wants to know, since alpha males play and beta males pay when it comes to finding a lover, why should a beta male bother? And how do you see this fitting in with the larger numbers of people not settling down, parentheses, marrying and having children around the world? Well, as you probably know by now, that is the perfect setup for an arcade discussion, which we're not going to get into right now. But if you don't know the book, obviously, Carlton, I'm never tired of promoting it. I'm sorry, Samuel. There's a book out called R/K, the something basis of politics by anonymous conservative. It's not an easy read, but it's the best thing I ever read. Just to answer your question, since it was ranked, let me just say this without getting into the whole arcade thing all over again. You say your premise is since alpha males play and beta males pay when it comes to finding a lover, why should a beta male bother? It's not actually quite correct. What I think is the case, certainly what that arcade book is saying, is that it is true that beta males don't win in competition. But to say that they don't get their shot at the ladies is to mistake the problem, because the problems we have are being caused by the fact that the beta males don't win in competition. So since they can't win in competition, they win by cheating. And that cheating is the source of so many of our problems, the societal cheating. Successful people, alphas, and it's not just males, successful people, alphas, like competition because they do well in competition. And when we lose a competition, if you're an alpha, and you lose in a fair competition, you would rather lose a fair competition than win by cheating because, number one, you have a moral code which is based on you being able to compete that says the rules are more important than the outcome for me particularly. I'd rather lose fairly than win by cheating because even if I lose, as long as it's a fair fight, I'll probably learn something from the loss and I'll become more fit as a result of it. I'll learn some lessons. I'll do better next time. That's an alpha attitude. It's the attitude of a winner. It's the attitude of somebody who can compete and win. If you're convinced for some reason or another that you have no chance to compete, then the ethical restraints of the alpha, namely playing by the rules, is a weapon that you can use against him. In other words, an alpha competitor will play by the rules because it's as instinctive in him as the act of competition is. If you're going to compete, you need rules. Wolves compete for mates, and they have rules regarding the mating fights that they do, because if they didn't, there'd be a lot of dead wolves. When a male wolf gives up the fight, he bares his neck, and the second he does that, it turns the aggression off of the victor. The victor just stops the aggression. Once the weaker combatant submits, the aggression's just turned off. Those are rules, and they're rules designed to protect us. And when somebody taps out on a mat or when somebody throws in a towel, that's the end of the fight, right? That's how it works with alphas. But betas are not bound by those honor codes because they don't have it in them. And so if I'm a beta and I say, hey, all these guys are playing by these rules, but there's nobody really checking on the rules or enforcing the rules. Therefore, if I break the rules, then I can win. Yeah, but it's not honorable. Who cares about honor? I don't care about honor. Yeah, but it's, it doesn't make you any stronger. You won't do any better next time. What do I care? I want to win now. And so that's it. So I think the premise is a little faulty, Samuel, just to say because beta males don't pay. Beta males can also play. And when they play by cheating, and cheating all across the board. So progressives are the betas and the conservatives are the alphas. You may not like it, but it's true. Alphas like competition. That's why we like capitalism. Progressives like non-capitalism. That's why they like these collectivist redistribution of equal parts of misery to everybody. You can say you'll live worse in a communistic society, and a beta will say, yes, but as long as I live equally badly and no one else is living better than me, I'd rather live worse, as long as we're all living worse, than to live better and have somebody live even better than me. It's hard to say. Hard to say. So there you go. And it's a societal cheating that gets us into all these problems, really, when you get right down to it. And election fraud is one of them. The progressives are all in favor of election fraud. That's why they don't want IDs. What's so bad about an ID? Well, it's racist. How's it racist? The ID doesn't care what color you are. Well, most black people, there are more poor black people than, there are a greater percentage of black people live in poverty than white people. What does that mean? IDs don't cost anything. You just have to go down to the DMV. Yeah, but they have to get to the DMV and maybe they have to take a bus. Well, I took bus for 4 or 5 years of my life. If you don't want to spend one bus fare and 2 hours of one day for 10 years or however long the ID lasts, maybe you don't deserve to vote. If you can't go and get a free ID because it's a lot of trouble, it takes 3 hours of your life, you don't have to do that every year. You don't even have to do it every election cycle. You probably have to do it every 10 years. If you can't go down and get a free ID, then maybe you don't deserve to vote. We want people to have IDs because we don't want them to cheat. They want people to not have IDs because they want them to cheat, because they can't win without cheating, apparently. That's why they want to have, instead of an election day, they want to have an election month. Well, you should be able to vote all month. Sure, you should be able to vote all month if you want to vote more than once. The reason we have an election day is because it's very damn difficult to vote in California and in Florida on the same day, or at least it used to be before jet travel. So, it's pretty straightforward. And so this is how you beat these people, by the way, is you call them out and say, so listen, conservatives think we need a voter ID because we don't want to cheat. What is it about your position that requires cheating? Are you saying you can't win without cheating? And you'll hear progressives say things like, well, voter fraud is not really as important as voter suppression. Denying somebody from their vote is a real crime. If somebody votes more than once, well, that's not as bad as denying somebody from their vote. But voter fraud is voter suppression, because if a progressive votes 3 times, then their first vote, their legal vote, cancels this conservative's vote out. Fair enough, that's how it works. Their second vote steals the vote of an actual conservative who only voted once, and their third vote steals the vote of yet another person who only voted once. So that person who votes 3 times has stolen the vote, suppressed the vote of 2 people that he voted against. Voter fraud is voter suppression. So there you go. So ask them why they have to cheat. Do you have to cheat to win? Is that what you're saying? Is you saying that your politics and your philosophy is so bad that you have to cheat to win? Because if it is, come out and tell the American people right now in this debate, Ms. Clinton, come out and tell the American people that you believe that Democrats have to cheat in order to win. Because I'm saying that voter ID is neutral. It's party neutral. Voter ID, I didn't say we only need IDs for Democrats. I didn't say we only need IDs for liberals. I didn't say we only need IDs for black people or poor people or Hispanic people, and not for white people. I'm saying everybody needs to have an ID. Everybody needs to show it on election day. And if you are not in the country, if you are physically out of the country and can prove it, you get an absentee ballot. Otherwise, you go down and vote on election day. Now, if you don't think that those rules are important, explain to the American people why the Democrats have to cheat to win. Because I don't think the Republicans have to cheat to win. I think if we play fair, we win. So tell me why you have to cheat. Go right to the heart of it and make them say it. Make them say it. You need an ID to cash a check. You need an ID to buy a beer. You don't need an ID to run the most powerful nation in the world. Call it what it is. And then if you want to pile on, say, Eric Holder, who's so against the idea of IDs in general as being racist and horrible. If you want to go and thank Eric Holder for his magnanimity, you have to show an ID to get into the Justice Building. Why is that, Mr. Holder? Why do you need an ID to come into the Department of Justice Building, but you don't need an ID in order to fund the Justice Department building? Somebody want to explain that to me? Doesn't make any sense to me. So there you go. Last question. Where do you want to find? Cheryl Twomey says, Elie Wiesel, the author of Night and a concentration camp survivor, was recently quoted as saying that if Jews had been warned about Auschwitz, they would not have gone so willingly to slaughter. Do you think ISIS, in the absence of the 21st century media, and technology, would have had the ability to commit the next Holocaust? How important do you think social media is in preventing this? There's a couple different things there, Cheryl. Let's start with the initial statement. I have enormous respect for Elie Wiesel. And needless to say, I have a tremendous amount of sympathy is not the word, genuine, heart-rending pathos for the Jewish people and for what they endured. But I want to take this thing apart bit by bit. To say that the Jews weren't warned about Auschwitz is a premise I'm not sure I'm willing to grant. I will say that of all the things that have an effect on the human psyche, terror is the most powerful. The Soviet Union was run on terror. It was predicated on terror. And without terror, there could be no Soviet Union. In fact, there can't really be any kind of dictatorship without terror. And as a person who's never been terrified, consistently, repeatedly terrified, because ongoing terror will result in the reduction of your resistance to terror. As a person who's never been terrified for years and years and years, I don't know the power that terror would have over me. I will tell you that what I do requires a certain amount of courage to use my own name and go out there and speak the truth as I see fit. It's not without consequences. But wishful thinking is one of very, very few shields that you have against terror. And I think that the Jews in the years leading up to the end of World War II comforted themselves with wishful thinking in the face of virtually overwhelming evidence that things were not only bad, but murderous, and then more murderous and getting worse. Now, the problem, of course, is that by the time that many Jews realized just how bad things were, they weren't allowed to leave the country. I read a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Mr. Frankl, Dr. Frankl, was a survivor of both Auschwitz and Dachau. And he was on a train several times moving from one camp to another, because we think of concentration camps and the death camps, we think of 4 or 5 camps, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. But there were actually hundreds of them. There were hundreds of satellite camps. And they would move prisoners from one camp to another. And during their entire incarceration as prisoners, from the first moment they got there, even on their way there, they knew that they were in death camps. It was just a matter of time. So I am not 100% sure about the not have gone so willingly to slaughter. I don't know exactly where he's put it. Look, I'm not trying to put any kind of moral opprobrium on the Jewish people at all. Some things are just too horrible to consider. But when you would see people walking in line to be shot in a ditch, where you had 200-300 people in line and 4 soldiers with bolt-action rifles. This is the first adult thought I ever had. I looked at a picture of these when I was a kid. I said to my dad, why didn't they just run? What have you got to lose? You're watching people be shot right in front of your eyes. 3 ahead of you, 2 ahead of you, you ahead of you. Why not run for it? What's the worst that could happen? But I have had it pointed out to me in a way that makes sense to me that it's easy to sit here in an air-conditioned room and talk about how you would have run for the woods, but if you were actually there, all kinds of psychological things start to take over. One of the things that I read in a tremendous book called, I think it was Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman, which is about the concentration camps and the gulags. He said one of the things, it's a very simple thing really, but he said one of the things is that when you make somebody naked, when you strip their clothes off, they become essentially powerless. They become unbelievably docile. I believe that has a fair amount of truth to it. So look, I'm not trying to say that I don't even really know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know if I buy this idea that nobody knew it was coming, that we didn't know until we saw the ovens up ahead of us. I don't think it does us any good as a species to take that attitude, when I think the critical issue is, why did people continue either to stay in the country or deny it in the face of overwhelming evidence? It's that is the mechanism that's so powerful and that allows so much of this to happen. It's that sense of denial, the power of denial. The power of it is overwhelming. Now, with that out of the way, there's no question that if it was clear to them, in other words, if they'd seen the documentary footage that we'd seen prior to the SS arriving at their door, there would have been a lot more resistance. There would have been more physical resistance. There would have been more escape. There would have been more of that for sure. But I don't know if it would have completely defeated the wishful thinking. And I think that the European Jews were especially susceptible to this only because they had been so beaten down for so long, they'd been so intimidated and so persecuted for so long, that they had developed culturally a defense mechanism of denial, a sense of just a sort of belief that if we just keep our heads down and weather it out, it'll get better. I don't think Americans would go, I know Americans wouldn't go as willingly as the Jews did. Now, part of that is because we have the example of the Jews ahead of us. But part of it also is because freedom does breed a certain amount of strength, psychic strength. When I asked my dad about that picture, like I said, I was 5, 6, 7 years old, something like that. And he said, he talked about that, why they didn't run. And I said something to the effect of, well, what happens if somebody like that were to come for us? And he said, look, Billy, I couldn't stop them from taking us. If the state has turned against you, I couldn't stop that, but I could make sure that some of those guys didn't go home that night. And even at a very early age, that made real sense to me. Real sense to me. I mean, 6 million Jews gassed and probably another 4 or 5 million surviving. I don't know how many members there were in the SS, but I'm telling you, if each one of those Jews had had a gun, or each family had had a gun and shot 1 or 2 SS murderers as they came through the door, would have been a little tougher for them. I don't know what would have happened in a case like that, but it would have been something. And so all of this really ties together, but basically what you've got in America is you've got a combination of a citizenry that has been anyway, extremely independent, self-reliant. These are virtues in our society. We celebrate these things. We celebrate the idea of resistance to authority, of rebellion. Rebellion is an American character trait that we admire. We're heavily armed, by and large. And many of us know why we're heavily armed. And we're heavily armed because of this reason. This is why we have guns in our houses, why I have a rifle and a pistol in my house. It's not because I'm terribly worried about a drug dealer coming through my door, although that would be a handy thing to have if it happened. And it's not that I even really expect to use it, because I don't really expect to use it. I think the fact that I own them is enough of a deterrent value. And I think that's certainly the case. It's not a mystery that when dictators come to power, the first thing they want to do is disarm the citizenry, if it hasn't happened already. Stalin and Lenin disarmed their people. Hitler disarmed their people. Everywhere you go, China. And I didn't think that you could disarm a modern people, and then I watched what happened in Great Britain maybe a decade ago where there's a shooting in was it a McDonald's up in Scotland or something? And they basically said, all right, no more guns for you. And the entire country turned in their guns, virtually the entire country. And then now they're trying to defend themselves with knives against armed robbers and murderers in their houses. And when they knife a guy who's after somebody's broken into their house 9 times, somebody knifes an intruder defending his house, knifes him in his own kitchen in a scuffle. The homeowner goes to jail, and the guy who got knifed sues the guy and gets damages. That's a world upside down, and you're going to pay the price for that. And Britain is paying the price for it. The crime rate in the streets of London is much higher than violent crime in London is much higher than it is in New York City. So it's the ownership of the gun that's the genuine deterrent. No one's going to come and start kicking down doors in America and taking people out of their homes and into vans without the sound of gunfire. And that's why I don't think it's going to happen here. Other things may happen, but I don't think that's going to happen here. And you're going to have a hard time in America finding the kind of people that become professional murderers. I'm not talking about soldiers now. We have the finest soldiers in the history of the world. But it's a whole different kind of person who becomes a wholesale government murderer, an SS man. And even the worst of those people often drank themselves to death. So even those murdering savages have a shred of a conscience. Same thing for the Russians. All the Russian executioners end up drinking themselves to death. The kind of people you can find to go and take innocent people out of their houses at night for murder is not a large number. And they're not terribly brave either. They're followers, and they're bullies, and they're a species of people that like wearing the big uniforms and the black outfits and the jackboots. And as long as nobody's shooting back, then they can be super big tough guys. But when people start shooting back, they kind of go back to being the chicken farmers they were in the beginning. So the reason that we don't have so much to worry about in terms of that kind of tyranny here is because I don't know how you'd find a whole lot of people willing to go and kick down American doors. Because I think if you had guys, even if you had the president order or whoever ordering, no, we need to start taking these families out of here or these guns out of here, kick their doors down and go get them. If somebody said, what crimes have they committed? They said, none, they just own guns. You're not going to find a whole lot of people willing to take that risk and pretty soon you'll have even fewer. So, still on the first part of this question, an unarmed population is compliant because here's this part that interests me. It's not that the Jews were compliant because they didn't own guns. It was the fact that they didn't own guns that advertised their compliance. And this is the thing that's such a mystery today with modern American Jews. You would think that Jews in America today would be the most heavily armed people on the face of the planet. You would think that you would go to a gun store and you would see rows of Jewish Americans with little boys with yarmulkes on, getting them their first .22 at age 10 or for their bar mitzvah or whatever. I can't imagine having what happened to the Jewish people happen to my people without me making sure that it's not just a slogan on the back of a bumper sticker, never again. I would make sure that it would never happen again, because if I was a Jewish father today, I would tell my children about what happened in Nazi Germany and in Russia. Let's not forget the Soviet communists, because those socialists killed a few Jews themselves. Those socialists in the Soviet Union killed millions of Jews, and the socialists in Germany killed millions more. And I would basically, when my boys and girls were old enough to understand the meaning of the word, if I was an American Jew and old enough to understand the fundamentals of responsibility, I would run them down to the gun store. Boom. In fact, I would do what was done to me when I was a, 6, 7-year-old kid. I didn't get a gun when I was 7. I got a BB gun when I was 7. And reasonably enough, my father assumed that if he gave me this, it wasn't even a pump action gun. It was a lever action, single lever, single crank, Daisy BB gun in the shape of a Winchester rifle. And I'll bet you, although in retrospect I thought, at the time I thought the thing was damn near a bazooka, but I bet you in retrospect it probably wouldn't go from here to the far wall. Certainly couldn't really hurt yourself with that thing, but my dad's point was, and he was right, let's see how they behave with BB guns, and then if they're behaving themselves, then we'll walk them up. And that's exactly what happened. We had a single lever BB gun, and we never shot at each other. I never shot at my brother Steve. Steve never shot at me. After a few months or years of not shooting at each other with lever action BB guns, we got pump action BB guns, which can actually sting quite a bit. You put an eye out with one of those things. I don't even think our lever action BB gun would shoot your eye out. I don't even think it was a Red Ryder BB gun even capable of shooting your eye out. But the pump action gun would, and then a pump action pellet gun could do some real damage, although you really have to try to kill somebody, really try pretty hard to kill somebody with a pellet gun. However, and my brother's much more into this than I was, wasn't long before he got a 22 short round rifle, and then he got a 22, and then he got whatever he wanted because he'd shown he could handle it. But while he was showing he could handle it, we were getting familiarized with it. We were getting familiarized with the responsibility of it. We were getting familiarized with how to aim. It's a little bit gruesome, but to be honest with you, I grew up in South Florida, and any of you who've ever been in South Florida know that South Florida, at least in the area, with the exception of, let's say, 100-yard radius from our house, is filled with these little lizards. They're, anywhere from this big to about this big. I think they're geckos, pointy nose, really beautiful little creatures, really lovely little creatures. And they're tiny, and they move fast. And my brother Steve and I, with our lever action Daisy BB guns, made sure that there was not a gecko within 100 yards of our house. Anytime we saw one, we could knock those things off a leaf from 30, 40, 50 yards. We were just deadly with those things. So you learn how to aim, you learn how to shoot, you learn how to take care of it. You learn there's no such thing as an unloaded gun. You never point a gun unless you're going to kill somebody. All these things, we learned all these things. So you psychologically prepare for their use. And so where am I now? Just as a regular American kid raised, by a relatively, I wouldn't even say a super conservative dad, just raised by an American dad. Where does that leave me psychologically in the face of this kind of thing? It leaves me in ownership of a sidearm to kill guys at close range and a rifle to make sure that they don't get into close range, and it leaves me psychologically prepared to use it in defense of my life, my loved ones, and in a case that is virtually unimaginable to me, in defense of the liberty of this country against genuine oppression and murder on the part of our own government. I don't see that's going to happen here, but if it does, we're about as ready as we can be. And also, not to put too fine a point on it, you also have to start figuring out how you feel about living and dying and what's worth dying for and what's worth living for, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. So all of these things are things I'm prepared for. And I'm not sure that the European Jews were prepared for any of them. In fact, I'm quite sure that they weren't. Now, again, with that said, we have to understand the flip side of the argument. And the flip side of the argument, as somebody pointed out earlier in the comment section, I've been saving this for it, to literally to look at, on the other hand, when 9/11 happened, the people on the first 3 airplanes had an operational assumption in their heads, and this was a sensible operational assumption. And for the first 3 planes on 9/11, the assumption was if the plane is being hijacked, not just the smart play, well, not just the courageous play, the smart play, the sensible thing to do, because we had hijacks all throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and so on. The sensible thing to do prior to 9/11, if you were being hijacked, was to sit in your chair and mind your own business and be quiet, because it's a lunatic who's trying to get someplace. He's trying to get to Cuba, or he's trying to get to Mexico, he's trying to get to England, or he's trying to get somewhere. And up until 9/11, the smart play was to stay in your seat. Your plane will be diverted to Cuba. You'll sit on the ground for 6 hours or 9 hours or 2 or 3 or 4 days or whatever, in which point the diplomatic details will be untangled. And you'll fly to Cleveland and you'll be late, but you'll be alive. And being a hero prior to 9/11 was not smart. They weren't killing hostages. They weren't shooting people, most of the time anyway, in the domestic hijackings. They just wanted to go to Cuba, and the plane was full of people. So take the ride, sit down, endure some discomfort and some boredom, and come home. That was on September 10th of 2001. But after that, the situation changed. And I've said this before too, and the thing I think is most remarkable about Flight 93, and bears saying every chance anyone has a chance to say anything about Flight 93, the most remarkable thing about Flight 93 was that there was nothing remarkable about Flight 93. That's the amazing thing about it. The amazing thing about it is that there was nothing amazing about it. The only difference between Flight 93 and the other 3 flights that day was that the people on United 93 knew what was going to happen to them. And because they knew what was going to happen to them, that changed their operational procedures. And in the space of a half an hour or so, our junior varsity girls team beat the national champions from the jihadi squad. They organized a plan. They divided labor. They had a stage of operations. They required preparation. They prepared. They improvised. They summoned their natural courage and their natural resistance and their natural strength, and bonding together, including, gay men, women, businessmen. None of these were SEALs. None of these guys were professional warriors. Maybe 1 or 2 of them were amateur athletes. They came up with a plan. They executed the plan, and while they weren't able to save their own lives, although they had a plan to do that too, apparently there was a pilot, I believe, that they were holding in reserve to land the airplane and save the flight. They stopped that plane from hitting the White House or the Pentagon or the Capitol or whatever. And it's simply one of the greatest things ever. They went at them with forks, and they went at them with fire extinguishers and boiling water. And they improvised all this stuff against people who've been planning for 4 or 5 years. So when I say on the other hand, I do mean on the other hand. When you know what's coming and you have a chance to prepare, even if it's prepare for 10 or 15 minutes, because Flight 93 didn't have much more than half an hour, I guess, to really get it together. And when you understand that the consequences are, you're almost certainly, well, you are going to die if you don't act. If you act, you have some chance of survival. And even if you don't have a chance of survival, your action can save other people's lives. That is a profoundly clarifying moment for some people. And so off they went. And it's one of the greatest chapters in American history. In my mind, it is. It is one of the greatest, most heroic chapters in American history because of how ordinary it was. And that's what happens when you know how to prepare. I've often wondered, and I mean this in the most sincere way, it's not a rhetorical wonder, I genuinely am curious to wonder if that aircraft had been filled with people of a different nationality, whether they would have found the courage and the initiative to do it. I suspect they probably would have, but it's possible that they wouldn't have. I don't know. That's an interesting thought experiment. I don't know whether a plane load of Swedes or Frenchmen or Russians or Chinese or anybody would have found the initiative to do it. But I can, strangely enough, it may just be prejudice on my part, I can, strangely enough, say I think it would be more likely that Americans would do it than Brits, but Brits far more likely to do it than Russians or Frenchmen. And I see, if it were me, I think the people who you could count on to do something like that would be Americans, Canadians, Brits, Australians, people with a sense of individuality and people with a sense of natural sort of independence and self-reliance, that made these Anglosphere countries what they are, that made Great Britain what it is, or was. So anyway, you get the idea, right? So I guess it's both, Cheryl, to answer your question. I know you talked about ISIS and social media. I think largely ISIS exists because of social media. It recruits through social media and these beheadings and executions are all part of a social media advertising campaign. If we don't understand that, then we don't understand anything about them. It's a social media advertising campaign, and it's effective. And it'd be a lot less effective if we started advertising the death of people who go and join ISIS. And I mean close-up details. If you're going to see a guy on fire in a cage, close-up HD video footage of somebody burning to death as a result of ISIS's actions, I'd start putting close-up HD footage of the aftermath of Hellfire missile attacks online, and I would say, join if you want to. This is what's going to happen to you. Because, again, it's all a one-sided information war. It's completely asymmetrical. So I don't think it's not just social media or the computer age. It's really the age of television and portable radio, mostly television, because frankly pictures are so much more powerful than printed word or spoken word. You can hear and read about the experiences of troops liberating these camps, but nobody remembers those things. Everybody remembers the images of the bodies stacked like cordwood. You can talk about the wreck of gigantic vessels, but in many ways, the crash of the Hindenburg is more real than the sinking of the Titanic, because even though the sinking of the Titanic caused far, far, far more deaths and was a much bigger event in terms of the world, we all got to watch the Hindenburg crash. I've seen the Hindenburg explode dozens of times. Nobody alive today saw Titanic sink, and only a handful of people lived long enough who lived it. No one who wasn't there saw it sink. It's one of the reasons why I think Titanic was such a big success as a movie, because the Titanic legend was so enormously huge that people had a desire to see it. I saw the movie in the theaters probably 5 times, and for me, the first hour and a half is interminable. After the first time, it's like, can we please just have this iceberg hit this thing? I want to see what it looks like when a vehicle that size goes under the water. And it was spectacular. So Titanic tapped into this giant unmet need on the part of the world population, which was, God, we've all heard about it. I bet it was a hell of a thing to see. Well, it turns out it was a hell of a thing to see. And Cameron, who I do not much admire as an individual, nevertheless really delivered the goods. I mean, he built a 7/8 scale Titanic? And I guess there's some savings at 7/8 scale. Me personally, if I'm going to build a 7/8 scale Titanic, I might as well build a full-scale Titanic. I just can't imagine why you'd go to the trouble to build it 7/8 scale. I'd just do the whole damn thing. Anyway, it was a need that wasn't there, so I don't even think ISIS depends on social media. I think as long as there's electronic field gathering, electronic news gathering camera, ENG cameras, as long as you can get a news crew out there and bring back camera footage. Once we got to Vietnam, where you were getting daily video reports of American killed, not so much of the Vietnamese killed, but American soldiers coming back in body bags and being lifted out of combat. Once you were able to see those things on a daily basis, it's very difficult to pull off any kind of mass atrocities in the age of mass media. And before anybody jumps on me, I'm not accusing our soldiers of anything like that. I think so much of this Vietnam atrocity stuff is the invention of the left. Certainly bad things happen over there, and My Lai being an example of it. But My Lai is also an interesting example for a number of other reasons. The perpetrators of My Lai were tried and convicted. Nazis were encouraged to go and murder everybody in a village. You'd be promoted for that. When that happened as a result of extraordinary criminality and lack of leadership, those responsible were punished. And furthermore, there's American soldiers who landed helicopters in between our soldiers and Vietnamese civilians in order to protect them. You didn't see that happening too often with the SS. So I guess what I'm trying to say just on this one little sub-point is war does horrible things to people and destroys their souls and their consciences. And American soldiers are no more immune to that than anybody else. Well, I think we are, actually, because I think we're just more decent people. But even then, the stresses of that kind of war can drive men crazy, including American soldiers. The difference between us and the Nazis is not that our soldiers don't occasionally commit atrocities. It's that they occasionally commit atrocities while their other team is ordered to commit atrocities. And when the human heart fails, in the case of American military soldiers, the society at large demands justice. It demands justice. that is an atrocity, a war atrocity, is an abhorrent, disgraceful, degrading condition for the U.S. military, and it is standard operating procedures, and in many cases it was promotable and noble in the cases of people like the communists and the Nazis. There's a difference, right? It's not that we're different people, it's just different society, different values. Anyway, we did a short show tonight of 2 hours, 36 minutes, and 14 seconds, and that's what happens when I make promises to myself that I can't keep. But it's only 8:35 here on the West Coast, so I'm going to start buffing up those missing Stratosphere Lounge episodes, start uploading those to YouTube. Then I'm going to get back to editing some Speakeasy. I'm going to start editing Speakeasy real early tomorrow because I'm going out of town for a couple days. Sort of a working vacation, 1 day work, 2 days vacation. I'll be back for a day, and then I'm out another event in Arizona. I'm back again. So I don't think we'll have one next week, but it was fun doing one this week, and can't ever close these shows, without thanking you for your support, and those of you who are members for your membership. We do have a new show for members only called Speakeasy, which I hope will have our first installment this weekend. We have done time over targets every single day for the last 6-7 weeks now. That was a big commitment on our part, and took a while to get going, but it's happening, and it's happening daily. So if you would like to become a member of BillWhittle.com, there's 35 of them, I think, in the bank right now waiting for you. 35 3-minute episodes on all kinds of different things. You can submit a question, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. But the other members-only show, Time Over Target, is going to be happening, hopefully the first of which this weekend. We're going to make some changes for the next one around, learned a lot from it, but we still had a lot of fun. And in any event, hang on one second. That's the end of our show for tonight, and as always, it's a pleasure. So Stratosphere Lounge episode 91 is, the short show is over, and while we won't see you next week, we'll certainly see you the week after that. So as always, be careful out there, and don't give up the ship, hold the fort, hang in there. Things may get worse, but they'll get better. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be talking to you tonight. All right, everybody. It's good seeing you again. Thanks for all the support as always, and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.